The Great Young Wolf. TFJYs 49. Summary. Come the new year, I started reading Game of Thrones fanfictions, and I decided to write one of my own. This is my first ever one, so feel free to give whatever criticisms you think are necessary. And there are plenty of what-ifs in this. What if Ned sent Robb to King's Landing to learn under Jon Arryn? What if Jon Arryn sent for his great-nephew Harold Hardyng to get to know his great-nephew better? What if Arianne Martell was sent to King's Landing to case the joint for House Martell? And finally, what if Theon chose to support the family that he felt a part of rather than the family that scorned him back home? I make no apologies for my bias towards Robb Stark, he is my favorite character and deserved better than what he got. I decided to go with Robb Stark and Arianne Martell because they seem to be a rarely used couple, and when I got planning and read a few other fanfictions online, I thought that this would fit perfectly. Well, enjoy, and like I said, feel free to give whatever criticisms you think are necessary. Chapter 1, Introduction. Chapter Text. The Great Young Wolf. There are 6 main characters / narrators in this story, and whilst 4 of them are on the show, there are 2 who aren't on the show. I've chosen those whom I think look like their counterparts from the books. Main characters. Robb Stark, Richard Madden. Harold Hardyng, William Moseley. Arianne Martell, Janvi Kapoor. Tyrion Lannister, Peter Dinklage. Gendry Storm, Joe Dempsey. Caitlin Tully, Michelle Fairley. Chapter 2, Prologue. Chapter Text. Prologue. Jory Castle, Jaime Sives. Jory Castle had been captain of Lord Eddard Stark's household guards for 7 years now, thanks in no small part to his uncle Sir Roderick's position as master-at-arms and trainer to the sons of Lord Stark, to Lord Stark's ward Theon Greyjoy, and on occasion, Lady Arya Stark. But also, when he was squire to Lord Stark when he was the age of the heir to Winterfell. His family had served House Stark for as long as history could remember. Jory often wondered what the future might have for his family, for they had no castle, no fiefdoms and no keep to call home, only service to the House Stark in Winterfell. He had fought in 2 wars. The first was in Robert's Rebellion, where had served as squire to Lord Eddard Stark and had fought at the Great Battle of the Trident. The second was the Greyjoy Rebellion. He would always remember that day at the Trident, for it was his first ever battle. He could remember the first man he killed, a knight holding the flag of House Martell as Sir Luwin Martell led his Dornish soldiers into the fray before Jory captured the banner. He could remember Lord Stark outfight several great knights, including Sir Jonat Hordeary of the Kingsguard. He witnessed how Lord Howland Reed defeated the legendary the great Sir Barristan Selmy the Bold. And of course, he was one of many whom had stopped to watch as Robert Baratheon smashed Rhaegar Targaryen's head in with his great hammer. But he had also lost his father in that war, fighting against the 3 brave Kingsguard at the Tower of Joy alongside Lord Stark and Lord Reed. Father was so proud of Jory for capturing the Martell banner at the Trident. Now the only family he had was his uncle Roderick and Roderick's surviving and very young daughter Beth, the same age as the very young Lord Bran. Jory's last name day was a moon ago, where he had turned 30. And now, he had left Winterfell and was the escort for the young Lord Robb Stark to King's Landing. He remembered the last time he had come to King's Landing. It was to attend the royal wedding of King Robert Baratheon and now Queen Cersei Lannister as the head of his Lord Stark's escort. He hated King's Landing. It was a great and expansive city, built with high walls, many great and tall structures of wonder and a ceaseless sunshine, at least in the winter. This was true, but the charms of King's Landing are better enjoyed from afar, thought the captain of House Stark's guards. Inside this god-forsaken city, the smell is of shit, of piss, of vomit, of sweat, of wine, of blood, of death and of brothels. Not at all like Winterfell, beautiful, clean, cool and peaceful Winterfell, where there is no stench at all or extreme signs of poverty. And not a godswood or even a weirwood tree to be found in the Kingswood here. It is no wonder why the Northerners never fare well south of the Neck, for the old gods no longer have any as strong a presence as they once did as one passes through the Riverlands. Though Jory was glad that there were still plenty of old gods worshippers in the Riverlands, especially amongst the lords and ladies. Southerners, arrogant, lazy, thick, naive and puny, that was what Jory Castle thought of the Southerners as he and the Stark entourage could see King's Landing and paused for Robb Stark to look at the city from afar. The young Lord Stark was at his side, looking with curiosity at this city. Jory hoped that young Stark would learn why it is that Northerners should stay in the North soon, for he had hoped to be back home, and was sure that Robb Stark would like to be back home soon and be with his family and friends. "How many times have you been in King's Landing, Jory?" asked the young lord. "Twice, my lord," he replied. "What do you remember most about it all?" he asked again. "The stink. By the old gods, it does stink. Think of all the horrible smells you can and put them all together, and even then, you will never be ready for stepping inside that cesspit of a city, my lord," he explained. He had become a boy of 6 and 10 only recently. Though he was growing up and was unmarried still, he needed to learn. He needs to learn why this city is a shithole and why southern intrigues are for themselves and not for northerners. That's why Lord Stark sent him to King's Landing, to learn what it's like to rule, but also learn how to rule alongside good and honorable men like Jon Arryn, Lord of the Vale, Warden of the East and Hand of the King, and to see for himself how ambitious Southerners are when they play the never-ending Game of Thrones. "Makes one question why they would want to be a king and rule in a place like here," remarked Robb. Jory chuckled and said, "My lord, it does. The only thing of note in the city is the Great September of Baelor, though it were built by a half-mad fanatic of a Targaryen king who might have tried to force the North to adopt these stupid 7 gods of the South. There is a godswood, but it is small and there is no heart trees." The young heir to Winterfell let out a short sigh. "Well, we've been sitting here long enough. Let's see what southern hospitality looks like," said Robb, and they continued riding towards the city, with the proud flag of House Stark's direwolf being flown atop the carriage. The carriage contained no one inside. Only the luggage of Lord Robb Stark, Jory's chest of his personal belongings and of course, Robb's growing direwolf, Grey Wind. Jory remembered when they first came across the pack of direwolves. Soon after Lord Stark had personally executed a deserter of the Night's Watch, the first to be observed by the young Lord Bran Stark. The Stark children loved their direwolves. Robb had Grey Wind, Sansa had Lady, Arya had Nymeria, Bran had Summer, Rickon had Shaggy-Dog, and the albino runt of the litter Ghost with Jon Snow, Lord Stark's bastard. "It'll be a good laugh when these poncy Southerners see Lord Robb and Grey Wind walk around the Red Keep," Jory thought as he tried to amuse himself as the many stenches of King's Landing attacked him and his entourage. Lord Stark handled himself well, though he could hear Robb mutter curses under his breath that would not impress the southern lords, ladies and royalty of King's Landing. Chapter 3, Chapter 1. Chapter Text. Robb I. Jory spoke true of the smells of this city, Robb thought as they stopped before the great city's gates. 2 gold cloaks stood guard at the gate and there was another 2 standing atop the wall at the gatehouse. "Lord Robb Stark?" asked one of them at the gatehouse. "Aye, that's right," said Robb. "Welcome, my lord." "Open the gates," said the guard as he looked down at his 2 comrades on the ground. Robb, Jory and their 6 northern companions rode through the gates. Waiting for them was a man wearing the armor of a gold cloak, but didn't wear a helmet like the others. He had a short grey beard and a balding head. He sat on his horse pompously as though he was someone of note. He must be a gold cloak officer or their commander, thought Robb. "Welcome, Lord Stark," he said before bowing his head. "My thanks, sir," Robb said, instinctively thinking that this man was a knight. The man scowled slightly, not at being thought of as a knight but as though he was annoyed that he wasn't one. "Apologies, my lord, I am not a knight. I am Janos Slynt, commander of the King's Landing garrison. But I am to escort you to the Red Keep," he replied with a polite smile. "I'm very grateful, Commander Slynt, Robb said politely as he tried to breathe carefully in between sentences because of the stench. He noticed a few commoners relieving themselves near a fountain and a few half-naked and drunk gold cloaks leave a brothel, very drunk in fact by the look of them. One of them still has his cock hanging out. "We're definitely not in Winterfell anymore," Robb whispered to himself as they rode through the streets. Janos Slynt rode at the head with several gold cloaks on foot in front of him, as though to keep order and keep small folk out of the way as they rode forth. Most people were dressed in filthy rags and clothes made of sackcloth. Robb was disgusted to see on the roads there was shit, vomit, wine and blood, and no one was there to clean any of it. The lack of sanitation was clear and it seemed to Robb that there was no sanitation in this god-forsaken city. It was only the shopkeepers who wore cleaner clothes and their establishments were clean. As they rode further into the city, the roads were cleaner, The people were wearing cleaner clothes and there were less obvious signs of poverty, other than a few gold cloaks beating quarreling small folk outside of a tavern and extorting from shopkeepers. The smells were awful and it was louder than it ever was in a summer market day in Winterfell. The heat bore down on Robb and his guards. It was a stronger heat than they had endured from after they had crossed the neck and into the Riverlands. "Why am I still wearing these clothes and northern furs?" Robb asked himself as he looked up and could see a great castle in the distance. The Red Keep. And to his right, he could see the Great September of Baelor. Built by a fanatically pious Targaryen king nicknamed Baelor the Blessed, a man who named a 6-year-old boy High Septon because he thought that this boy was capable of producing miracles. This holy king died after fasting because food was of the world and the world was full of sin. Half mad, just like Jory said. They stopped at the entrance to the gates to Red Keep, a great palace complex. But what struck Robb as unusual was the fact that the guards standing at the foot of the gates weren't gold cloaks. They wore red armor and cloaks decorated with golden lions etched on their cloaks and their shields. Lannister soldiers. The Red Cloaks. Why are they guarding the Red Keep? Robb wondered. Commander Slynt, why do Lannister soldiers guard here and not the gold cloaks? Commander Slynt's polite smile twisted into a grimace as though he was annoyed that his men didn't have the honor of protecting the royal court and therefore the king and queen. He said, "Her Grace, the Queen's orders, my lord." Ever since her marriage to His Grace, Lord Tywin Lannister has left a contingent of the Red Cloaks of Lannisport to guard Her Grace and the princes and princess. Robb nodded and said, "Thank you for the escort, Commander Slynt. Good day." "Good day, my lord," he said before he and his men left. "It seems that even the humble guard captains here have ambitions far beyond their own capabilities," Jory joked as he climbed off his horse. "Aye. Damn Southerners and their desire to be in the Game of Thrones," Robb said with a chuckle. The gates opened and a knight of the King's Guard marched out in front of the Lannister soldiers to meet Robb. The handsome knight with fair light brown hair bowed his head and said with a kind smile, "Welcome, Lord Stark. I am Sir Aerys Oakurt. His Grace bid me to escort you to the throne room and is very eager to meet you." "Thank you, Sir Aerys." "But what about my men?" asked Robb. "They are to be billed at the barracks over there, sharing with Lord Arryn's men," said Sir Aerys, pointing at a building with the blue flag of House Arryn hanging above its front door. "I'll send for you if I need you," Jory said Robb to the captain of his guards. "Very good, my lord," said Jory before leading his men to the barracks. "Tyrion, I'd much rather be in Casterly Rock than here," Tyrion inwardly said as he paid a gold dragon to last night's bed warmer. She eyed the coin greedily and put her dress back on and left his chambers. The Red Keep was bustling with activity and in anticipation for the arrival of Robb Stark, heir to Winterfell and the North. It would certainly make things less boring around here, Tyrion thought. But, even better, it would remind people of what a prince should be like. Tyrion grinned at the thought of his despicable shit of a nephew would think of the visiting Stark. Of course, he had known plenty of stories of the noble and honorable House Stark. He had heard and read about the stories of the bravery of Lord Eddard Stark in Robert's Rebellion. And Jaime spoke of him as a great warrior, and Jaime never spoke of warriors as though they were equals like he had spoken about Eddard Stark. Ned Stark would raise his sons to be good and honorable men. Tyrion knew this to be true, unlike Tyrion's fat, lazy and drunk of a good brother. Robert was not a good father to his sons or his daughter. At least Tyrion's own father acknowledged his presence and respected Tyrion for his cunning and his knowledge of the Game of Thrones. Maybe the young Stark has seen the wall up close, he thought as he had donned his doublet embroidered with the Lannister lion. Tyrion had always wanted to see the wall in person and to taste the delights of the North, more specifically the women of the North, he thought with a grin as his cock poked through his trousers. Can't have that show in court. I'd be remembered as the dwarf with the massive cock which keeps stabbing through my breeches. Tyrion walked from his chambers to the throne room. He stood at the far right end, where Jaime was also standing. In the center, Robert sat on the Iron Throne, with Queen Cersei sitting in a smaller throne on her husband's right. Tyrion had seen Cersei sit on the Iron Throne on occasion and she sat on it easily enough, but not comfortably. Robert, however, fills up the entire throne. Tyrion then grinned. Oh, it would be funny if suddenly the Iron Throne started crushing underneath his expansive body weight, made to look larger because of that silly locally made doublet, of course. Always get your clothes from the Reach, never from the local tailors of King's Landing. And of course, there was Joffrey standing next to his mother, a boy of 5 and 10 now, having only recently reached that age and had a small tourney held in celebration. Whispering poisonous little words to her precious little prince about what a great king he will be, Tyrion thought. It's your own fault that he is the way that he is, Tyrion had told her on occasion. But she would never listen. She was too blinded by what she wanted her son to be like that she never saw him for what a monster he truly was. Jaime was less than impressed also. But then Cersei's other children stood next to their uncle Tyrion, rather than with their mother, for that would mean being near their cruel and tormenting elder brother. Princess Myrcella and Prince Tommen. 10 years old and 7 years old respectively. And they were sweet, kind and loving, unlike their repulsive brother. "Hello, Uncle Tyrion," said Myrcella. "Hello, my dear. Are you excited to meet Robb Stark?" he asked with a smile for the girl he hoped would never be like her mother. "Yes. I've heard he's very handsome," she said excitedly with a blush before glancing over at where her mother was sitting, for her mother kept her far away from boys her age or older. "Don't worry. She won't hear. She's too busy telling Joffrey that the stories that Robb Stark is a better man than he is are all untrue," he said with a grin and a wink. She giggled and turned to her other uncle. "Hello, Uncle Jaime." Jaime turned around and faced Myrcella. He beamed at her as though he was a proud father meeting his beloved daughter. "Hello, Myrcella. How are you today?" he asked as he bent down to hug her. "I'm fine, thank you," she said as she hugged him back. And then he turned to greet Tommen. The throne room's doors opened and Sir Aerys Oakurt marched smartly through the aisle towards the king. Of all the Kingsguard, Jaime had told him that Sir Aerys was the man who behaved most like a knight of the Kingsguard should, like Sir Barristan Selmy, the Lord Commander. But the others, Sir Mandon Moore, Sir Meryn Trant, Sir Boros Blount and Sir Preston Greenfield, were all cruel and not worthy of the white cloaks that they wore or the oaths they had sworn to the king. Both Jaime and Sir Barristan were clear about that. "Your Grace. Lord Robb Stark, heir to Winterfell and the North," Sir Aerys said with a bow. Robert waved his hand and sat up in bated anticipation, in contrast to when he would normally look bored whenever he sat on the Iron Throne. Tyrion glanced towards his opposite side. There stood the hand of the king, Lord Jon Arryn. He too was craning his head to get a good look at the eldest son and heir of Ned Stark. Sir Aerys moved aside and Robb stood where he had been standing before he knelt to King Robert. "Your Grace," he said with a deep and tough northern accent. Tyrion glanced all around the throne room. He had heard mutterings of unwashed savage, northern barbarian and tree-worshipping wolves from the gathered courtiers and nobles of the Crown Lands, Westerlands and Stormlands in the court. But as Robb Stark knelt to his king, there was certainly a lot of excited gasps and muttering, most noticeably from the young maidens and ladies in attendance. And he could see why. The heir of Winterfell was not a northern savage, contrary to the earlier opinions of many in court. He was almost the height of Jaime. He looked very muscular as his muscles were bulging from the threads of his northern furs and his grey and brown doublet and cut a very imposing figure. He had the Tully look, inherited from his lady mother. He had thick and curly auburn hair, dark blue eyes and was very handsome. "Uncle Tyrion, doesn't he look handsome?" Myrcella whispered dreamily. "Yes, he does, my dear," he whispered back, whilst glancing at Cersei and Joffrey. "They don't share the same opinion as you, my dear," Tyrion inwardly said to her. "Robb, stand, stand," said the king, who stood up and looked like a proud father. The first time he had ever seen Robert look as such, he had never made such a face when meeting any of his children. "You stand like your father, but you look like your mother. Good thing you inherited her good looks, isn't it?" he asked with a booming laugh, which was met with chuckles and laughs from the sycophants of court. Robb grinned boyishly and stood to face the king, and Robert shook his hand and patted him on the shoulder as he said, "Welcome to King's Landing, my boy. Welcome. Anything for Ned's son?" Neither Joffrey nor Cersei looked welcoming or happy. Joffrey looked jealous at how much attention his father was giving to Robb Stark. "Well, that didn't take long. He's already making fast friends," Tyrion remarked to Jaime. "It's unlikely our crown prince will be one of them." "Doubtless Joffrey will challenge him to a fight soon enough," Jaime replied with an embarrassed grimace. Except in the presence of Cersei, Jaime always looked embarrassed at the very mention of Joffrey or what he had been doing. Father would undoubtedly be furious of Joffrey bringing shame to father's great Lannister legacy. In fact, he brings more shame than I did at his age. With crossbows or swords? Asked Tyrion. Jaime sighed with impatience as though he couldn't wait for the day to end. Robb was brought towards the Iron Thrones where he knelt before Cersei and kissed her hand, to which she flashed a cold and false smile as he said, "Your Grace." He turned to Joffrey, whom was sneering at Robb and was puffing his chest out as if to make himself appear as muscular as the northern guest, and tried to make himself appear taller by standing on the highest steps. "Why don't you both go and say hello?" Tyrion asked Myrcella and Tommen. Myrcella blushed redder than the red of a Lannister flag and said, "Uncle Tyrion, I couldn't." "Oh, go on. Be brave like your Uncle Jaime and say hello to that Auburn wolf," he said. He brought Myrcella and Tommen with him towards the Iron Throne. "Lord Stark. May I introduce my niece and nephew, Princess Myrcella and Prince Tommen," said Tyrion. Robb turned to face them and bowed his head to the two children. "Princess, hello. That's a very pretty dress. Is purple your favorite color?" he asked with a friendly smile. "Yes, it's like lavender, my lord," she said with a shy smile and a blushing face. "Oh, you like lavender, do you, princess?" he asked. "Yes, I do, my lord. It's my favorite flower," she replied before looking down at her feet very shyly. He then turned to Tommen. "Hello, my prince. What have you got there?" he asked. Tommen held up his little pet kitten. He did so nervously because Joffrey was within a spear's length from him. He had heard the story of Joffrey murdering Tommen's kittens for no other reason than for pleasure. And what did his mother tell him when he came to her crying? A prince mustn't cry. If it was another child who had done the evil deed, she wouldn't have said such a thing, Tyrion thought. "His name is Sir Pounce," he said with a shy smile. "Hello, Sir Pounce. What's he like? Is he strong and fast?" he asked as he ticked behind Sir Pounce's ear, which made him purr. "Yes. Like a lion," Tommen said proudly. "Are you going to be like a lion or a stag, my prince?" asked Robb. "Strong like a stag and fast like a lion," he replied proudly. "I have no doubt about that, my prince," he said with a kind smile. He'd be a far better brother to those two than Joffrey ever would, Tyrion thought. Robert started introducing him to the members of the small council, starting with Jon Arryn. The elderly, but tall and smartly dressed Lord of the Vale looked impressed by Robb Stark and shook his hand and beamed at him. "You have the look of your lord father when I first took him in when he was younger than you," he told the northern visitor to the capital. "Days which he remembers fondly, my Lord Arryn," said Robb. "Well, dear sister, it seems the young Stark gets on well with your husband and the hand of the king," Tyrion gestured to his sister as she sat back down on her throne and Lord Arryn's nephew walked to his uncle and Robb Stark. "A northern savage. Why did father talk to him as though he was his son? I am the crown prince. I will be king one day." Joffrey whined like a little crying newborn. "Perhaps because he doesn't complain like you do," said Tyrion with a wide smirk. Joffrey looked down at him and said in a cruel sneer, "Watch what you say, Uncle Imp, for I will be king one day, and I will remember all that you have said." "Do I look as though I am shitting my pants, Joffrey?" "No." "Well then, perhaps you should fight more often and perhaps you would look as scary as that northern savage," Tyrion replied with a grin before walking away. All this court intrigue and seeing the local nobility either look in adoration or disgust towards Robb Stark is making my throat thirsty for wine and my cock hungry for whores, he thought as he left the Red Keep and towards one of Littlefinger's brothels. Harold I. Sir Harold Hardyng was the great-nephew of Jon Arryn, Lord of the Vale, Warden of the East and Hand of the King. His grandmother was the older sister of Jon Arryn. He had only met his lord uncle a few times, when he was a boy and was brought from the Vale to King's Landing to meet him. But now, at the age of 8 and 10, this strong and smooth-haired young knight was in King's Landing to be beside his uncle. Despite being a very handsome young knight and with the dirty blonde hair that was usual for those of the noble house of Arryn, Harold had failed to interest any young ladies of court because he had no lands and no apparent future. But whilst Uncle John was always kind and welcoming to him, the same could not be said for his Aunt Lysa. She was a bitter and unkind woman to Harold from when they first met when he was 5. She had had many unsuccessful births after being married to the Lord of the Vale, a man old enough to be her grandfather. The only successful child she had given birth to was the young Robin, a frail, timid and spoiled boy of 7. His hair was brown like a beaver, which Harold found strange, for he did not have either the auburn-colored hair of the Tullys or the dirty blonde-colored hair of the Arryns. The only one in court whose hair color matched Robin Arryn was Littlefinger. Harold had noticed when he saw Littlefinger say hello to Robin on a few occasions. But in his lady aunt's opinion, there was no finer boy in the 7 kingdoms than her beloved little Robin. Harold failed to see how the boy could be of any relation to him or to his lord uncle. He was weak, he hid behind his lady mother's skirts often. Lysa would always make sure to keep him far away from Prince Tommen. Though they were of the same age group and their fathers were close friends, Lysa had made sure that he never spent any time with boys of his own age. A boy like that will never succeed as Lord of the Vale, his lord uncle always told her. But she kept a firm grip on her son, never wanting him to be far from her. Harold agreed with his lord uncle, for when he was Robin's age, he had been a squire to the Lord Yohn Royce for over a year, known as Bronze Yohn Royce around the kingdoms, for the great and indestructible ancestral armor he wore. He was Jon Arryn's most trusted and battle-hardened bannerman, the man whom had led the Vale's armies to war in Robert's Rebellion and in the Greyjoy Rebellion. Lysa saw Harold as a threat to her son's claim as Lord of the Vale. If he makes it that far. Harold knew as well as any who saw the boy, that he was ill with something that no Maester or Grand Maester could cure. He had fits and outbursts at every random moment and made demands of everything from cakes, sweets and exotic fruits from the Reach and Dawn, all in great quantities, and wanted someone to sing for him as he went to bed. Nothing was ever enough for the spoiled little boy. If you offered him 5 lemon cakes, he would want 10. Lord Royce had given him the same lesson that he had given his sons Ander, Robar and Waymar: never succumb to the finer things in life, or you will never be able to stop yourself. Words that carried with Harold. He had been knighted only a few moons ago by Bronze Yohn Royce, with his aunt on his father's side, Lady Anya Waynwood, watching with pride after winning a small tourney in Runestone, designed to choose the future knights of the Vale, the pride of the Valiman chivalry and honor and the finest knights in the 7 kingdoms, whom could outride, outfight and outmaneuver all opponents on the battlefield as they had done against the Targaryens at Stony September and at the Trident, and crushed the best of the Ironborn infantry at the Siege of Pike. If Robin is to die before he reaches an old enough age to be a husband and a father, then I would be the heir to the Vale, Harold realized as he had arrived at his lord uncle's insistence 2 moons ago, so soon after he had been knighted. To celebrate his knighthood for winning a tourney, he had gone to a tavern and drank. But he had drunk so much, that he woke up the next day, in bed with a tavern maid, called Sissy. He was approached by Sissy a moon later to tell him that she was carrying his child, for she had not drunk any moon tea after their encounter, nor had she been with any other man. He had given her all his remaining tourney winnings for the child. He had hoped that one day he would see his child and help his child in whatever way he could as honor demanded. Harold loved to joust and he loved to fight with swords. But the competition in King's Landing was poor. Hedge knights, sellswords, minor sons of minor nobility and travelling lords and their sons. He had offered to fight with Prince Joffrey on more than one occasion, but he was cruelly sneered at by the pretty lemon cake of a lion cub and told him that it's beneath a prince to fight a knight with no estate or lands. He had fought with swords against some of the Kingsguard. He had managed to defeat Sir Oris Oakurt, Sir Boros Blount, Sir Meryn Trant and Sir Preston Greenfield. But the ones he could never beat were Sir Mandon Moore, Sir Jaime Lannister and Sir Barristan Selmy. Sir Barristan was patient and polite and gave good advice to him. Sir Jaime made jests about his skill, but said that he was on the right path to becoming a great knight. But both told him the same thing about Sir Mandon Moore. Be wary of him. All the time. Though he is unworthy to wear that cloak, he is a very dangerous man. He agreed with them. Though the other knights of the Kingsguard, Blount, Greenfield and Trant were cruel and unsympathetic to any peasant, knight or noble who came to the Red Keep for an audience, they looked human when they sneered or looked down on one. In comparison to the storied knights of from the Kingsguard long ago, such as Sir Oswell Went, Sir Gerald Hightower and Sir Arthur Dane, men whom were brave, chivalrous, honourable, dutiful and loyal to their king, loyal to the death. But Sir Mandon Moore, he showed no emotion, he just stared at one with cold, unflinching and almost dead eyes. The first time Harold had met him, he shivered when his eyes met the former Knight of the Vale. Harold was excited when he had heard the news of the arrival of Robb Stark. He looked forward to meeting someone new to the capital, for he missed his home in the Vale and climbing hills and mountains and going for rides on his horse, Stormwing. He never went anywhere without Stormwing. He was a parting gift from Lord Royce when he had finished his service to Lord Royce as his squire. Indeed, his lord uncle had told him how he hoped that he and Robb would become friends. Harold stood in the Red Keep with the other courtiers to await the arrival of the young northern lord. He was impressed when he saw him enter alongside Sir Oris Oakurt. He was a handsome and strong man. He had the look of a warrior, in spite of being a year or so younger than him. He saw he looked uncomfortable in his northern furs. Did they not give him time to change out of those when he arrived, he wondered. A savage. He looks like how I imagine the greatest knight of the realm to look like, he heard excited whispering from the young ladies of the court in front of him. "Seven help me, I think I love him already," whispered the shy and timid, but pretty and cute Lady Jane Westerling in front of him. "All these ladies look younger than me, Robb Stark and Prince Joffrey, but older than Princess Myrcella. Gods, are they childlike and gullible? Will they still have girly brains when they are 30? Harold grinned with satisfaction when he saw the reaction of Joffrey as Robb Stark was being greeted by the king, the hand of the king and the more honorable lords in court. Soon after the excitement was over, and lords, ladies and courtiers were talking amongst each other, Harold took this as his opportunity to meet Robb Stark. "Please don't be an arrogant shit like most of the petty lordlings and the idiot prince." He walked towards the far edge of the court where he saw Robb talking with Lord Arryn and Lady Arryn, whom was holding her sweet Robin's hand, as she called him without shame. How will any lord have any respect for such a boy if he becomes Lord of the Vale? Lady Lysa's mollycoddling of her son will shame the good name of Arryn. Of that, Harold was certain, and knew that he was not alone in such opinions. When he was seen by Lady Lysa as he approached, she scowled at him and said, "Come, let's away, sweet Robin, and get some lemon cakes." Lord Arryn turned to face his great-nephew. "Harold." "Good man. Robb, this is my guest and my late sister's grandson, Sir Harold Hardyng." Robb turned to face him and he smiled and offered his hand. Harold shook his hand and said, "It's good to welcome someone new to the capital. So many poncy and soft southerners who would freeze like an icicle on a winter's day down here. I've noticed that." "Do you get cold winters in the Eyrie?" asked Robb. "Often. Not as cold as the north, but in the hills and mountains, your family's words always come true in the end." As we often remind the southerners, but do they listen? No, they think that summer will always last. "And those fools will always be the ones who blame us for their own stupidity and lack of preparation," said Lord Arryn with a chuckle. The two young men chuckled with the hand of the king before he put his hands on both of their shoulders and led them away from the court. "Now, let's away with the court and dishonorable viper pit that is the mixing pot of King's Landing's nobility. Filled with nothing but vipers, bootlickers and fools. You both are meant for far more than just mere pawns in this game that the High Lords of Westeros play, this Game of Thrones. Now, I will tell you both the same thing I had told your Lord Father, Robb, when he was old enough to understand such things. No good ever comes of such games. Even those that win, must rebuild all the damage that they caused, pay for the costs and listen to the grievances of the families who lost loved ones, all so that one lord could rise above his station." Harold glanced at Robb as his uncle finished his statement. Robb stood firm and strong and looked as though he paid attention to every word and that he agreed with him. "Good, my uncle is a wise man and it's a good thing that I'm not the only one who pays attention. No one else around here seems to, either because they are too lazy or too corrupt," thought Harold. "Now, every time that there is a small council session, I want you both to attend, for I want you to see what it is like to rule and how the Southerners play the Game of Thrones. And if you have any sense, you'll learn why it is best to never play in it. No one ever plays the game without losing some, if not all, of those whom they love," Jon Arryn told them. "But, until then, Harold, why don't you show Robb where you spar? And get him some more climate-appropriate clothes while you're at it," said his lord uncle, at which the two young men chuckled and took their leave. Harold took him to Robb's quarters in the Tower of the Hand and there Robb changed into direwolf-embroidered clothes. "I'd love to see him give a good battering to a southerner for calling him a northern savage," he thought. After Robb finished, Harold escorted him to the sparring yard, where he could see a few young noblemen of the Crown lands sparring with each other. Harold had fought each of them and beat them all easily. If there ever was a war, none of them would last a minute on the battlefield, despite their talk of how brave they would be. "They're as green as the farmlands of the Reach," Harold thought with scorn. "Do you practice much with a lance in Winterfell?" Harold asked. "No. Not much. My lord father has me and my brothers practice more with swords and bows rather than with lances. I have practiced with them with Riverland knights, but not as much as I would like," Rob admitted as they walked to the weapons racks. "Would you care for a show of strength, my lord?" Harold asked him. "Gladly, Sir Harold," said Rob. "Please, call me Harold," he replied. "Well, then you may call me Rob." "Being called my lord makes me feel as old as half the bootlickers in court," he replied. They chuckled as they donned practice leathers, and Harold picked a blunted sword and wooden shield from the racks whilst Rob had chosen a large two-handed greatsword. "Yes, the lickspittles of court do make you tired. Listening to them sing the praises of King Robert, Uncle John and even Tywin Lannister makes me want to cut my ears off," said Harold. Rob raised his eyebrows and shook his head with disapproval before saying, "In the north, you'd never succeed in showing such behavior to a northern lord. We of the north tell you how it is and are more honest than anyone south of the neck." All the young noblemen that Harold had been scorning had stopped to watch. 5 gold dragons on Stark. "I'll bet you the same but on Sir Harold, he'll easily batter the northern wilding," said another. Well, that didn't take long. Rob turned to the one who called him a northern wilding and asked, "Would you like to take the place of Sir Harold?" Harold didn't care for the interruption. He hated it when people interrupted a conversation that they weren't part of, but he smirked and gestured to the young lord, whom he recognized as the young Egon Wentwater, heir to House Wentwater, a Crownlander family of minor importance, and minor influence. "Go on, Lord Wentwater. Let's see if you learned anything from our last encounter," said Harold with a grin as he sat down in the shade. Wentwater waved his sword around a few times as if to try and frighten Robb Stark. "Sure, wave your sword at him one more time and he might just piss himself, laughing," Harold thought. And sure enough, Wentwater attacked, only for Robb to block his blow with his great sword and then push him back and sliced down on an unprepared Wentwater and his shield. He hit him with such a force that Wentwater fell on his back and his sword falling far from his hands. The other little lordlings laughed at Wentwater's easy defeat. "Well, now that you've bravely fought the Northerner, can I take my place?" Harold asked as he walked past Wentwater as he tried to push himself up. Harold held his shield up and readied his sword to face Robb. Chapter 4, Chapter 2. Chapter Text. Catelyn I. It had taken a week before Lady Catelyn Stark came to terms that Robb was now in the south and not home in Winterfell. Her family were all different because of it. Bran and Rickon were either climbing or fighting each other without Robb to supervise them. Theon and her husband's bastard, Jon Snow, were dueling, though Jon was the victor in most of their fights, for Theon never fought as much as Jon and Robb would do. Theon preferred to use a bow rather than a sword. Whilst Sansa and her friends were being taught sewing by Septa Mordane, as opposed to when if Robb was around, her friends Jane Poole, Beth Castle, Winifred Marndaly, Joan Elsa Wynn, Eddara Tallheart and Aelys Karstark would be looking onto the training yard and giving misty-eyed looks to her eldest son. And then there was Arya, shooting far better than any of her children and even competing with Theon, or she was doing such wild and unladylike things. Catelyn still hoped that she would grow out of this hyper sense of adventure that Arya seemed to have. But her husband chuckled whenever he saw her try to talk sense into their youngest daughter. "She has the wolf blood, Cat, just like her aunt and uncle," he would say. Her aunt Lyanna, kidnapped by Rhaegar Targaryen, which started Robert's rebellion and caused the deaths of tens of thousands of people, including Catelyn's betrothed when she was the same age as Sansa. The young and handsome heir to Winterfell, Brandon Stark, Arya's uncle. But when Lyanna was kidnapped, Brandon furiously left for King's Landing and demanded that Rhaegar release his sister. The Mad King Aerys murdered both him and his lord father Rickard. And so, Ned, the second son, became Lord Stark. All for it to have been for nothing, when Ned finally found Lyanna at the Tower of Joy in Dawn, alongside his companions Howland Reed, Martin Castle, Ethan Glover, Sir Mark Ryswell, Theo Val and Willam Dustin. But Lyanna died. Ned returned to Winterfell several moons later, soon after Catelyn had given birth to Robb, only to see Ned return with a baby in his arms. "This is Jon Snow." "My bastard," he said. Whenever Catelyn asked him to send him away, he would always refuse to. And when she asked him who the mother was, he would turn sad and quiet. He never told anyone who the mother was, not even to the bastard whom lived in Winterfell. But what made it worse, was that whilst Robb, Sansa, Bran and Rickon all inherited the Tully auburn hair and blue eyes, it was Jon and Arya who looked more like a Stark, with black hair and grey eyes. It had been a moon since Robb's departure when Catelyn and Ned were sitting in their solar and preparing a letter for King Robert. There was a knock on the door. "Enter," said Ned. The door opened. "It is Mayor Stillowin." "Begging your pardon, my lord, my lady." "A raven from King's Landing." "It's from Lord Robb." Catelyn eagerly took the letter and broke open the seal. "What does it say?" Ned asked. "Robb is well, but he says things which could have him arrested for treason," she replied. "What things?" Ned asked with worry. "He says that the Crown Prince is nothing like his father and that he is overindulged by his mother and tortures his brother and sister for pleasure, and that there is a popular rumor that he murdered Prince Tommen's pet kittens," she replied. "Sansa cannot marry such an evil young man, even if it is a royal order." "I will deny it," said Ned as he sat down and wiped his brow. "Robert has always wanted our two houses to be bound. He will want a betrothal. If not Sansa and Joffrey, then what?" Catelyn asked. Ned thought about this and suggested perhaps, Robb and the Princess Myrcella. "Ned, she's too young." "She is the same age as Arya, if not younger," said Catelyn. "She'll grow up. She won't be a girl forever. But, by the time that Robert and I discuss this in person, she'll have grown up. And if the stories are true, she is a pretty and good girl. She would be a good wife for Robb," he said. "What else is in the letter?" Ned asked. As Catelyn read the rest of the letter, her eyebrows raised when she read about a friend that Robb had made. "Robb has made a new friend. The great-nephew of Jon Arryn, Sir Harold Hardyng," she replied. "Have we heard of him before?" Ned asked. "Yes, Lysa despises him and thinks that he is a power-hungry young man who wants Robin to die so that he would be the heir to the Eyrie." "But what does Robb say about him?" Ned asked. "He says that he is a good young man, he's an excellent swordsman, excellent with a lance and is kind and handsome," Catelyn replied. Ned nodded and said, "Well, I'm glad that Robb is making friends amongst Southerners, even from a small landless house such as the Hardyngs." "Was there more?" "Yes, he says that he's learning plenty from Jon Arryn and that he's the only fully trustworthy and honest man in the small council. He gets on well with Lord Tyrion Lannister, whom he considers to be a kind and wise, and yet an eager player of the game amongst a nest of vipers. He has also written that the Lannisters have a stronghold in the capital, with the Red Keep guarded more by Lannister red cloaks than it is by gold cloaks. Tywin Lannister having a stronghold on the capital, though he might call it protecting his daughter and his grandchildren," Ned said as he grimaced at the mention of Tywin Lannister as he thought about all of the atrocities that the man had committed. "Shall I send a reply to Lord Robb, my lord?" Mayor Stillowin asked. "Yes. I shall write one just now. We shall expect him home to be in time for his name-a-day," Ned replied as he picked a parchment and his quill. 6 moons from now, Ned. That's too long in King's Landing for a boy so far from home." "He's not a boy. He's a man now. He needs to learn, and who better than the man who taught Robert and I?" "And winter is coming," Ned replied. "Arianne." It had been 3 moons since Arianne had last seen her father. Doran Martell, the Lord of Sunspear and Prince of Dawn, had been ill with gout for over a year and spent his days in a wheelchair and dutifully guarded by his large and brutish bodyguard Ario Hotter, whose enormous axe looked large enough to cut a horse's head off in one blow. Her father lived in the Water Gardens, a small palace outside of Sunspear, and had done ever since his illness had struck. He had been lonely ever since Arianne's mother, the Lady Melorio, had estranged from him and returned to her old home, the free city of Norphos, far across the narrow sea. Leaving Arianne alone to do as she pleased, which is how she liked it, until she was invited to the Water Gardens to meet with her father. Arianne enjoyed it at the Water Gardens, which had the most beautiful gardens and scenery in the whole of Westeros, but it was quiet and peaceful here, which she could understand why her father wanted to spend his days here rather than in Sunspear. But she was angry with her father, the Prince of Dawn. Only a year before, she had once walked into her father's solar, back when he was still living in Sunspear, hoping to see him, only to see he was not there, but what she noticed were a few letters on his desk. She read them to see that they were to her younger brother Quentin, mentioning Doran's intentions to name him as his heir. Under Dornish law, unique to the rest of Westeros, men and women held equal inheritance rights. Arianne was the eldest of the 3 children of Prince Doran Martell, Quentin the second child and Tristan the youngest. So why was she being cast aside by her own father in favor of her brother, the foolish and feckless Quentin? What did he know of rulership and Dorne that she didn't know? He can't even handle himself in a fight with any of our cousins. And it wouldn't surprise me if he's still a maiden. Arianne had only just turned 21. But even then, she had earned a reputation known across all Dorne and the upper echelons of society in the Seven Kingdoms. Whilst Queen Cersei Lannister was known to be the most beautiful woman in Westeros and Lady Margaery Tyrell was known to be the prettiest, whereas Arianne was known to be the most seductive, sultry and voluptuous. She had used her physical beauty to get what she wanted from when she turned 4 and 10 and, in the end, she always got what she wanted. Whether it was with a sweet word, a provocative stance or taking a man or a woman to bed, she was never shy of working to get what she wanted. Whilst her brothers were unsuccessful in such respects with both men and women, Arianne's successes were almost rivaled by the eldest of her dear cousins, the Sand Snakes. The Sand Snakes were the 8 bastard daughters of her uncle, Prince Oberyn Martell. Oberyn, Nymeria, Tywin, Sarilla, Elia, Oberla, Doria and Lorza. Arianne, Oberyn, Nymeria and Tywin often enjoyed sharing the same men and women or taking turns with them. They even held bets of who could seduce which man or woman. Arianne was escorted to the water gardens by a contingent of House Martell guards, and once inside the main part of the palace, her guards left her. She saw her father sitting on his wheelchair and looking out at the gardens, the pools and the fountains. Aereo Hotter, the large Norvoshi giant with an even larger axe, stood loyally guarding his prince, but smiled when he saw Prince Arianne. She smiled back at a man whom she had known since she was a little girl. "Arianne, welcome," said Prince Doran, turning his chair to face her. "Father," she said, walking closer to him. "I hear you've been busy of late with the bastard of God's grace," he said. Demon Sand, an old friend of Arianne's. Indeed, he was her first from when they were teenagers. A recently knighted bastard son of Surian Illyrian, whom was the future lord of House Illyrian. And Demon was also the former squire of her uncle Oberyn. "An old friend, as you've said," she replied with no grin or smile. Like all the men and women she had lain with or seduced, he was either a friend or something to use to get what she desired. She had never fallen in love with any man or woman, boy or girl. Though she had always dreamed of being married to a dark and handsome knight. At the back of her mind, she still wanted that. She wanted to marry a brave and fearless knight who would avenge her Aunt Elia and her cousins Aegon and Rhaenys, after they had been evilly murdered by the Mountain, Sir Gregor Clegane and Sir Amory Lorch, on the orders of Tywin Lannister during the sacking of King's Landing. Dorne had never forgotten Elia's brutal rape and murder, nor the murder of her children. Neither did the Martell family, who had for years been appealing to King Robert for justice, though he gave them none, for they were dragon spawn, in the eyes of the Targaryen-hating king of Westeros. But it seemed that Prince Doran had forgotten about Elia, his own sister. Oberyn certainly hadn't, for the two were always very close. "Well, I hope these activities and pastimes of yours will not interfere with your duties to Dorne," he asked. "Duties? What does he talk of? Does intend to name me heir to Dorne, as is my birthright," Arianne thought. "Or does he intend to marry me off to some faraway ugly and impotent geriatric like Walder Frey?" "What duties do you speak of, father?" Arianne asked, and it was then that she noticed that he was holding a letter in his hand. "I have here, a letter from Jon Arryn, the Hand of the King. He's offering a delegation from Dorne to visit King's Landing for talks on bettering relations between Dorne and the capital," he said. "Does he intend to make me another Elia? Another martyr for Dorne to suffer at the hands of the Lannisters or the Baratheons?" Arianne was filled with angry doubts and fears. "Alone?" she asked. "No, not alone. You will be taking a contingent of 30 guards, as is befitting your station as a princess of Dorne," he said. "Am I, father? Am I a princess of Dorne?" she wanted to ask, but found herself unable to say it. Why now does he send an invitation to Dawn? She asked. I am unclear as to why. But what I do know is that the Lannisters are tightening their hold on King's Landing, for Tywin sent over 100 soldiers to add to their now 650 soldiers in King's Landing. Lord Arryn meanwhile is one of the few good men who is doing anything for the realm whilst his king is whoring, hunting, feasting and drinking. But Ned Stark sent his eldest son and heir to King's Landing, and he has been in King's Landing for the last few moons. Presumably to learn under Jon Arryn. But whatever reason, we must have a foothold in King's Landing and to make our presence known, and if possible, make allies and friends. Can I trust you do just that, Arianne? If anything, this would prove her worth to her father, that she was entitled to her birthright of Dawn and Sunspear, and that she was capable of playing in the Game of Thrones, better than any of the more honorable fools of Westeros like Jon Arryn, Ned Stark or Stannis Baratheon, and most of all, she could play it better than either of her brothers. Of course, father. I will leave tomorrow, she replied by bowing her head. Thank you, Arianne. Goodbye, he said with a smile. Gendry Gendry was a blacksmith's apprentice at Toib Homart's smithy at the foot of Visnyas Hill in King's Landing. He didn't remember his mother that well. She sang to him as a boy but soon died when there was a riot in King's Landing. He never knew his father at all. He was only 5 when his mother had died. He wished that his father would know about him and take him away from the hell that was Flea Bottom. That was his hope when he was young. From when he was 5, he was without a home or a family. He would beg for bits of food outside of taverns and brothels, until Goldcloaks kicked him away and laughed cruelly as he ran away. Whatever I do in life, Gendry had promised himself when he had turned 7, I will never ever become one of those cowardly Goldcloaks. I would gladly smash a hammer into their faces before I would be conscripted to be one of them. He hated them, he especially hated their commander Slynt, riding on a horse around the city as though he was a high and mighty lord. If he was a lord, or even a knight, he wouldn't be here, he would be gossiping with the milords and miladies at the Red Keep, Gendry thought. Instead, that stupid, frog-faced prick son of a fishmonger's square butcher is stuck down here with all the pisses and shits of King's Landing. But all changed when one day soon after turning 8, whilst standing underneath the statue of Baelor the Blessed, he was praying to the Seven and to Baelor the Blessed for something good to happen to him for once. For his father to come and help him. For any good man to give him a chance. That's all Gendry ever wanted as a boy. And his prayers were answered. For as he prayed, he heard an old man's voice behind him. I don't think I've seen you here praying, my young friend. He turned around and faced a cleanly shaved old man who was looking at him with a kind smile. He wore the clothes of a lord. He looked like a lord. His clothes were dark blue and he wore a brooch and a pin on his tunic. The brooch was of a white falcon in a blue background and the pin was a golden pin with a hand above a crown on it. At first, Gendry had considered walking away, but this old man seemed kind to him and had a friendly smile, and his voice was clear and gentle, as though he would never ever have any ill intentions to any man. No, milord. I just wanted to pray for my father to come and take me away from here, he replied as he got up from kneeling down. The kindly lord gestured for him to sit down next to him. He did so and he asked, "What is your name, young man?" "I'm Gendry, milord," he replied as he sat down. "What do you know about your father, Gendry?" he asked. "I know nothing about him, milord. I lost my mother when I was 5. I've been on the streets ever since," he explained. The lord smiled sympathetically at him, whilst Gendry looked shyly down at his feet. "Look at me, Gendry." He looked up to face him. As he did so, the lord's eyes opened wide, as though he recognized something about him. He pursed his lips as though he was thinking what to do. "Gendry, my name is Jon Arryn, I'm a lord and I'm an old friend of the king. If you would like, I can help you. I can take you away from all of this and give you a job. Would you like that? Is this a dream? Because it sure feels like it," Gendry thought. "Milord, thank you." "Thank you," said the little Gendry. He could feel tears welling up in his eyes. He couldn't believe that his prayers had been answered so quickly. That the gods would bring this good and kind lord to help him. "It's okay, Gendry, it's okay. Now, come with me, let's see what would suit you," said Lord Arryn calmly, whilst patting his back. They walked together to Visnyas Hill. "Now, what sort of job do you want to have, Gendry? Asked Lord Arryn. I want to be big and strong. I don't want to see people getting hurt by cowards, and I want to be strong enough to stop them, Gendry replied. Lord Arryn chuckled lightly and he smiled and said, you remind me of someone from long ago, Gendry. You and he are very alike, in more ways than you realize. Who was that, my lord? He asked curiously. His name was Robert. He was from the Stormlands. Nearly 30 years ago, he came to my home along with a friend of his from the north, called Eddard. I had no sons back then. I raised them as if they were my own. I loved them, I still do. Robert was a little boy when I first met him, only a little older than you. He grew up to be the biggest and strongest man I have ever met. He loved to fight, and when he fell in love with a beautiful young woman, he realized that he would do everything that he could for her and never be away from her. And he promised himself and that woman's family that he would love her from that day until the day he died. Did they marry, my lord? He asked. Lord Arryn's smile turned into a sad frown and he said, no, a bad man took her, before they could get married. Robert was so sad and so angry, that he promised that he would do everything he could to save her and to kill the man that took her. He killed him, by smashing a great hammer into his chest and then into his face. But when he found her, she had died. He was never the same man afterwards. So, my advice to you, Gendry, don't fall in love so young. He stopped his talking when he spotted a blacksmith, the smithy of Toib Homart, one of the best blacksmiths in all of King's Landing. Ah. Now how about this, Gendry? Would you like to be a blacksmith? Lord Arryn. Yes, my lord. Thank you, my lord, he said with the biggest smile he had had in a long time. Lord Arryn paid for his apprenticeship and would visit him once a week at the statue of Baelor the Blessed, and they would talk about how he is faring. Now, at the age of 6 and 10, Gendry had come to the statue of Baelor the Blessed. He had recently forged his first ever sword, a short knightly sword. He wanted to gift it to Lord Arryn in thanks for all that he had done for him. Master Toibho had helped him get started, and remembering the blue falcon's brooch that Lord Arryn wore, he had built a falcon pommel for the sword's handle. Gendry had spent a day at the whetstone to sharpen and perfect the blade for the man who had changed his life for the better. Gendry walked to the statue of Baelor the Blessed and waited for Lord Arryn to appear, with the sword underneath his blacksmith's jerkin. He saw Lord Arryn approach and he smiled at seeing Gendry, and Gendry smiled back. Lord Arryn sat down next to him and said, Gendry, I swear by the statue we sit under, you are getting bigger, stronger and more handsome every time that I see you. Gendry chuckled and said, I have been working extra harder this last week, my lord. Oh, good lad. Good lad. And tell me, what's that you're hiding under your jerkin? He said with a conspiratorial chuckle. Gendry pulled his jerkin off and handed the sword to him. It's for you, my lord. In thanks for all that you have done for me, he replied. Lord Arryn looked very surprised and held the sword. He drew the sword from its scabbard and waved it around. He nodded approvingly as he waved it. Gendry blushed with pride that he liked it. And then, he noticed the pommel. My goodness, Gendry. Oh, you do have good eyes. Better eyes than most lords and ladies at court do. Thank you, my lord. Do you like it? Oh, I do, my dear boy. I do. Thank you. Now, all good swords have a name, so what should we call this? Tell you what, since you made it, how about you give it a name, he offered. Gendry thought about it and said the first thing that came to mind, Falcon's Beak. Falcon's Beak. Yes, a good name. I like it. Oh, thank you very much, Gendry. Thank you for this beautiful gift, he said as he sheathed Falcon's Beak into its scabbard and tucked into his belt. Now, Gendry. I have come here with another offer for you. Now, you seem to be enjoying your position as a blacksmith, but this may yet be a bigger opportunity for you, now that you are a big and strong lad as you wanted to be all those years ago, he said. What are you offering, my lord? Gendry asked. A chance to be a squire. My nephew is a knight, but he doesn't yet have a squire. Now I don't want you to worry, for my nephew is a good man, he is kind and he is honorable, just as I have wanted him to be. He used to be a squire himself. And if you do become his squire, you will learn how to fight, how to read and write, how to ride a horse, and perhaps, if our old friend towering above us is kind enough, you would become a knight one day. Does that appeal to you? Gendry liked to be a blacksmith. Of course, he did. But he had spent so much time at work, that he never did get the chance to learn how to fight. He had helped Master Toibho forge weapons and armor, sharpen weapons, hammer armor and work at the smelter and the forge. You're a big and strong lad now, Master Toibho often told him. And he often got into fights at taverns when he could get the chance to have a drink. He was surprised when he knocked out a man with one punch after he tried to take advantage of a young barmaid. But to be a squire, and maybe even a knight, he could defend the weak and fight those cowards who would dare to harm the defenseless and weak. Yes, my lord. I would gladly become a squire for your nephew, Gendry said. Good man. Now, let's go back to Master Toibho one last time and pay him for his kindness in teaching you and for you to say thank you for all that he has taught you. Gendry followed Lord Arryn to the Red Keep. Of course, Gendry had seen the Red Keep in all its magnificence, but only from the foot of Visneur's Hill or in the slums of Flea Bottom. But to see it up close, it was something else entirely. And he was glad to see no gold cloaks around, just soldiers who wore red and gold armor with golden lions on their armor and their red cloaks. Gendry followed Lord Arryn to what was called the Tower of the Hand. And when they walked inside, he said, "Now, Gendry, first, we will talk in my office about something important before we begin your time as a squire. Now, you may become angry when I tell you this. But I want you to promise me that you will let me explain everything to you before you make any decisions. And please, don't be angry at me, for I only wanted you to be ready for this." Angry? Never. But, my lord, I could never be angry at you for all that you've done for me. Lord Arryn smiled sadly and said, "Hearing you say that does warm my heart, but it doesn't make what I have to say easier, it only makes it harder." What could be so terrible that he is only going to tell me now, Gendry wondered. They walked into his office and Lord Arryn sat down and told Gendry to sit down opposite him. The chair felt so fragile and precious that the strong and burly former blacksmith's apprentice was scared to break it and insult his lord and friend. "Gendry, I'm sorry for not telling you this sooner, for I didn't want you to be sad when you seemed so happy working under Master Toibho. But the truth is, from the day that I met you and I saw your face clearly, I know who your father is." Gendry's eyes opened wide and he tried to speak, but he couldn't it. All that came out was mumbled and stammered words that he couldn't make sense of. "My father? Who is my father?" Gendry was so confused. "Who is my father, my lord?" he was finally able to ask. "Do you remember that story I told you about when we first met? About the warrior whom I raised as a son, Robert?" he asked. "Yes, I do. Is he my father?" Gendry asked, half stammering over the words. "Yes, he is. Of course, he's known by another name right now. He is Robert Baratheon, King of Westeros and the Seven Kingdoms, and I have faithfully served as Hand of the King ever since he took the crown," he replied. "My father is the king. It can't be. It can't. If I am the son of the king, then why have I been living in Flea Bottom and working under Visneur's Hill for my whole life? If I am the son of the king, why hasn't he introduced me to the king? Is he truly my father? Will you introduce me to him?" Gendry finally asked. "I gladly would, if I could. But you see, whilst the king would be interested in meeting you, his wife would prefer it if you weren't alive. The queen is a cruel woman. Heavenly beautiful, yes, but cruel. As is her son, Prince Joffrey. Both would murder you without any hesitation," he explained. "But why? I'm just a bastard. I would never want to hurt them," he replied, the first time he had ever said that he was a bastard. "I'm a bastard. Not only that, I'm a bastard son of the king. That means that I'm Gendry Waters." "Exactly, you are in the right. You are a bastard. You see, most lords and ladies murder bastards in case they are a threat to their own children. In this case, the queen would murder you in case you tried to claim your birthright as a prince. For although you may be a bastard, you have the blood of great warriors and great leaders in you. Your heritage on your father's side goes all the way back to the great Storm Kings and great Storm Lords that ruled the South many years ago. Now, you understand why you must be kept a secret here. No one can know of your birth origins. I will never tell anyone without your permission, but you must not tell anyone you don't know or fully trust. For if they betrayed you, then either the queen or the prince would try to have you murdered. And I would never ever let any harm come to you, Gendry. You are a good lad and I know that one day you will become a great warrior and a great knight. I promise you, that I've only ever cared for you, looked after you and I would gladly do it all again. Gendry thought about all that he had just said. In only a few minutes, his life was forever changed. He now knew whom his father was and that he was his bastard son. But Lord Arryn was more of a father to him than any man ever was. He cared for him. He paid for his apprenticeship. He gave him that chance that he had always wanted. For Lord Arryn, Gendry would do anything. I believe you, my lord. And I could never be angry at you. Thank you, Gendry. Now, you should use the name Gendry Storm rather than Waters, to make it unlikely that you could be traced to King's Landing as a bastard of your father. And tell any who ask that you are from Storm's End. Do you understand? I do, my lord, said Gendry. Very good. Now, before you become my nephew's squire, it is high time that you learned how to read and write. I may not be as good at teaching as the maesters who taught me how to read and write when I was younger than you, but I shall do all that I can. This I promise you, said Lord Arryn, and he presented a quill, a bottle of ink and a few parchments. Chapter 5, Chapter 3. Chapter Text. Robb 2. It had been 6 moons ever since he had first arrived in King's Landing and Robb was already doing well here. He still hated the heat of King's Landing, the smells of King's Landing and the fact that there wasn't any weirwood trees in the Kingswood and the Godswood was far smaller than the Godswood of Winterfell. The great old Wolf's Wood was larger several times over than the Kingswood. But Robb was glad to have Harold as a friend. They jousted against each other, where Harold would always be the victor, but when it came to swords, Robb was often the victor. And it was one day whilst they had been sparring, they were expecting to join Lord Arryn for a session at the small council, when he heard the voice of Lord Arryn. Good day, my dear boys, who is winning? Robb is, my lord. I've spent too much time jousting than I have with swords, Harold admitted as he lowered his shield as he spoke to his lord uncle. Robb used this opportunity to strike. Never lower your guard, Hardine. Robb said with a mischievous grin before he struck at Harold. But Harold turned around and dodged his blow and smashed his shield against Robb's greatsword. You're nothing without a shield, Stark. Harold said with a naughty smirk. Robb held his ground and pushed against Harold as he pushed into him. They pushed against each other until Robb sidestepped and Harold lost his footing and was falling forwards and Robb struck. Harold blocked the blow, but still fell onto his back. He rolled to his side and regained footing, only for Robb to strike down his sword and point his sword at his neck. Well fought, you both. Well fought, Lord Arryn said whilst clapping. Robb pulled him up as they laughed before they both sat down in the shade when Lord Arryn stood in front of them, and accompanying him was a large and very muscular young man, whom Robb thought was muscled and handsome like a maiden's fantasy warrior. He looked stronger and more muscular than Robb and Harold. He had coal-black hair and a small stubble. And his muscles bulged out of his yellow and black tunic. Harold, Robb. This is Gendry Storm. He is your new squire, Harold. Gendry, this is my nephew Sir Harold Hardine and my guest, Lord Robb Stark. Gendry bowed to them both and said, my lords. Robb and Harold both nodded back to him and Lord Arryn said, now, I have an important session at the small council in the afternoon 7 days from now, but you two will not be in attendance. You see, I need you both to be the welcoming reception for a very important guest that afternoon. Who is this guest, my lord? Robb asked. Princess Arianne Martell, heiress to Sunspear and to Dawn. She arrives by ship 7 days from now. I expect you both to greet her cordially, and by the 7 be respectful and, if her reputation is to be believed, don't fall for her tricks. Relations with Dawn are bad enough without adding insults to the daughter of the Prince of Dawn, especially in this city where her great family has lost plenty of loved ones. As have my family, Robb thought. Lord Arryn left them and Gendry stood at the ready to serve Harold. Gendry, help take off this armor, Harold said. Right away, my lord, he replied, and he helped him take off his practice leathers whilst Robb took his off. He was getting used to doing things on his own. He never had a squire, but having been a squire to Lord Royce, Harold knew what it was like to be a squire, Robb realized. So, Gendry, what is there to know about you? Rob asked as he took a cup of water. I'm a former smith's apprentice, my lord. I was from Storm's End before my mother and I came to King's Landing. A former smith's apprentice. No wonder he is so big and strong. Speaking of his mother, reminded Rob of his own, whom he received a raven from, asking Rob to see if he could find a suitable match for Sansa in King's Landing as an alternative to Prince Joffrey. The first that came to mind was Harold. Despite being second in line behind Rob's cousin Robin as Lord of the Eyrie, Rob liked Harold and considered him a dear friend and was honorable, at least when he wasn't so bored that he would wander to the brothels on the Street of Silk. Oh, how I miss Winterfell. I miss the snows. I miss walks in the Godswood. I miss the cool air blowing as me, Theon and Jon throw snowballs, ride through the Wolf's Wood, fight in the yard under Sir Roderick's instructions and shoot arrows at shields thrown into the air by Bran. He hated it in King's Landing, where it stank and where it was unpleasantly hot. It wasn't where he belonged. He belonged in the north. He wanted to be in a Godswood and to breathe in the fresh air as he prayed to a weirwood tree. So, Princess Arianne Martell. Have you heard of her, Rob? Harold asked. I have only heard whispers. But not all rumors or whispers are true, Rob replied. But if they are true, she is the sultriest and the most seductive woman in the Seven Kingdoms, so definitely not a shy maiden. Any dress she wears will make a barmaid's dress look like something worn by a modest lady of the Reach. Harold joked as he stretched his arms out in the shade and drank some water. The two chuckled whilst Gendry put their swords and shield back on the racks where they belonged. Do you know how to fight, Gendry? Harold asked. No, my lord, I do not, he replied. Would you like to start? Harold asked. I would, my lord, if you would spare your own time, he replied politely. A very polite young bastard. He would get on well with Jon, Rob thought. The two were somewhat alike. We have nothing but time until our lunch and in 7 days, greeting perhaps the most dangerous woman in the kingdoms, second only to our most graceful queen, of course, Harold replied cheekily, though Rob noticed that Gendry tensed at the mention of Queen Cersei, as though he hated her. Rob and Harold stood back up and Harold picked up a sword and shield but didn't put on armor. Rob did the same. Choose your weapon, Gendry, Rob said. Gendry took a quick look around on the weapons rack and picked up a large wooden hammer. Gendry waved it around a few times without trouble. A very strong man, but strength alone is not enough to win a fight with a warrior, Rob thought. Now strike at my shield, Harold said, and he held his shield up. Gendry struck at his shield. It was a hard blow, but Harold still stood. Good hit. Well done. Now, keep striking at me until you knock me down. Just to get you used to fighting with that and so you get used to wielding a big weapon in the sunlight, he said. Gendry did as he was told and finally after 10 blows, he had knocked Harold down. He did the same to Rob. They spent the next hour with Gendry, where Gendry put on a light suit of leather armor and Rob and Harold would slowly strike at Gendry and Gendry had to block each blow, but as he blocked each one, the blows had become faster and faster. Gendry is our age if not younger, Rob thought, but he toughs out all blows that hit his armor. He stands as though he is a reincarnation of the warrior. 7 days later, after lunch and practicing jousting, Rob, Harold, Gendry, Jory and Savardis Egan, Knight of the Vale and Captain of Lord Arryn's household guards, headed towards Blackwater Harbour. Rob was sore after being knocked down from his horse by Harold's lance. He had told Rob exactly where he would aim at and he had hit him there dead on. My aim with a lance is better than any you'll ever meet, he proclaimed. Rob had heard many stories of the Dornish people, that they enjoyed the company of men and women both, and were not shy about raising bastards in lordly or princely households, as opposed to his own household when Jon was growing up. But his lord father always told him to never trust in stories or rumors until you come face to face with the subject of these rumors and decided and judge them yourself. So, for now, he would give Princess Arianne the benefit of the doubt. They stepped onto the stone quay of Blackwater Harbour and in the distance, Rob could see a small ship sailing towards them. Dorne didn't have a great fleet of warships, for they had little to no reason to have a strong navy unlike the North, the Riverlands, the Westerlands or the Reach due to threats of Ironborn piracy. As the ship sailed into the quay and a rope was thrown from the quay to the ship's first mate, Rob could see the Dornish princess. There was no mistaking her, for she was the only woman on board. She looked shorter than he was, by a foot, but she was unlike any woman he had ever seen, whether in Winterfell, Riverrun or King's Landing. From a distance away, he could see that her skin was sun-kissed with a bronze color, with raven black and curly hair which shined and fell below her elbows. Robb couldn't deny that she was very beautiful, sultry, voluptuous and wore a provocative dress that made any dress worn by Queen Cersei look as though it was a Septa's dress. She didn't seem to mind that any lustful man could see her large breasts through her thin silk dress. "Whatever you do, Robb, remember Lord Arryn's words and don't fucking look down at her dress up close, meet her eyes head on," he was inwardly telling himself as the ship was tied down and a plank was being brought forth. Arianne too. "Hello dinner," were the first words that came to mind when Arianne first lay eyes on those welcoming her and her entourage to King's Landing. Amongst her entourage was Sir Demon Sand. He had warmed her bed the night before, but now she was uninterested in him warming her bed tonight. Not when two handsome and delicious young men were standing in front of her on dry land. Once the plank was brought forward, Arianne confidently walked onto the quay and faced the two men. There was a tall young man, younger than she was by a few years, who wore a brown leather doublet and whose muscles bulged out underneath all his clothes. He seemed to be far broader shouldered than most men she had met, including her uncle Oberyn. He had beautiful auburn and curly hair and enchanting blue eyes like sapphires glistening from the sun. Arianne's own hair was always curled and was set in place with oils. "Maybe I can run my hands through his hair and play with it whilst he plays with me," Arianne thought as she looked at his handsome face. "He looks like a Tully, but he can't be, he's too muscular and too young to be Edmure or Tully," she thought. And to her amazement, he didn't once look down at her revealing dress. His eyes were fixed on her own, whilst her thin and revealing orange silk dress commanded the attention of all men around her, whether Dornish, Kingslander or amongst the welcoming reception. "Oh, how I love a challenge," she thought. "And he is my favorite type. I do like the look of wild and dangerous men like him." Standing next to him was a man of a similar age, who had short and dirty blonde hair. He too was very handsome, but looked down at her dress more than once. Innocent little glances, one could say. He was very muscular, whilst he did not look as muscular as the man with auburn hair. He did look lean, fast and hard. Arianne thought that he did look interesting. King's Landing will certainly be very interesting rather than what I had expected. It's a shame that Oberyn, Nymeria and Tywin aren't here. We would have so much fun with these two, Arianne thought whilst smirking. She had thought that her welcomers would be Lannisters, maybe even Tyrion Lannister. I wonder what it would be like to take a dwarf to bed, Arianne wondered. His prowess with women across all of the Seven Kingdoms was infamous, Arianne didn't deny. She had heard the stories and was interested in finding them out for herself, despite him being a Lannister. Though the stories were that he was a Lannister who was unloved by other Lannisters, he was a Lannister nonetheless. But these two and the soldiers accompanying them weren't Lannisters. "Princess Arianne, welcome to King's Landing. I am Robb Stark. And this is Sir Harold Hardime. We are your escort to the Red Keep and to his grace, King Robert," said the man with auburn hair as they and their party bowed their heads to her. "Oh, so you're Robb Stark, well, then I may be a true test of your house's famous ice-cold northern honor," Arianne thought, tempting as it was to giggle. But all she did was grin at him as seductively as she could, as though she was a whoremonger trying to entice the High Septon to the local brothel. She could see the Stark and Arryn soldiers didn't show as much restraint as the two lords before her. She was further impressed when she noticed that Robb Stark had closed his eyes tightly as he bowed his head. "Lord Stark, for a moment I thought that you were a Tully, a prancing little fish so far from home. But here you are, a furry wolf that's too far from the north," she said as she gently bit her lip and walked closer to him, and she looked up at him, sweating, though she couldn't tell if that was her effect on him or the weather's effect. "Princess, that is both my mother's family and my own family you are talking about, and I kindly ask that you talk about them with the respect they deserve," he replied with formality and restraint, and keeping his gaze fixed on her eyes and never anywhere else, even when she gave him a once-over look. "Still not going to look down, young Stark? Well, perhaps that will change," she thought with a grin, and as she looked up and down at him again, she turned to Sir Harold. He was very handsome, but he didn't look as muscular as Robb Stark, but he did look fast and agile like her uncle Oberyn. "So, what is a knight of a small vale house doing here?" she asked in an almost whisper. Sir Harold tensed and said, I am nephew to Lord Arryn and hand of the king, Princess Arianne, and I was invited to King's Landing as my lord uncle's guest. Falcons and wolves, so far from home. You both must be feeling alone, Arianne said as she sashayed between them, brushing the hems of her noticeably thin silk dress against them like a cat brushing against a man's leg. She stopped before turning back to them as they turned to face her, and she innocently asked, am I to walk to the Red Keep to meet the king alone? With no one to safely escort me? Robb Stark didn't take the bait as she had hoped and said, I could carry you over my shoulder, princess, though I think that would be unfitting for a... For a what? She interrupted, with a grin. For a princess of Dawn, he continued. Well, I think that I may ask for you to do more than just escort me around this city in the future, Stark. I may even ask you to escort me to my bedchambers, she said as he and Harold walked to join her. Harold let out a cough, which almost seemed like he was trying not to laugh. Are you all right, Sir Harold? She asked with a grin. Just the dust from this city, princess. And this heat, it gives one a terrible thirst, he replied. Heat. This is a cool day in comparison to Dawn. Perhaps you both should join me in Sunspear. We have good food, drink, beautiful gardens and even better company, both in public and in private, she suggested to them both. They shared a glance as if they were thinking this won't end well. We have good enough company in King's Landing as it is, princess. We have had the honor of working alongside Lords Jon Arryn, Tyrion Lannister and Stannis Baratheon, and the pleasure of meeting Princess Myrcella and Prince Tommen and of course, His Grace, the King, said Sir Harold. Arianne noticed immediately how he did not mention either Queen Cersei or Prince Joffrey, and that Robb didn't think to correct him and mention either of them. So, the rumors are true, she thought. Cersei is a spiteful serpent and Joffrey is a spoiled little shit who thinks himself a great prince and will be an even greater king. Well, do tell me more on our way to the Red Keep, Arianne said as she walked between the two, though they politely slowed their pace for her to keep up with them. So, have you been in King's Landing for long, Lord Stark? For a little less than 6 moons, princess. My lord father sent me down to learn from Lord Arryn, whom raised my father as his ward when he was my age, he replied stoically and with ice in his eyes as his eyes met hers, his inner ice still strong. Soon, that ice will melt, Stark, count on it. If the weather here doesn't do it, I will, Arianne inwardly said. And what of you, Sir Harold? Why are you down here with your uncle? She asked. I've been here for a moon or so longer than Lord Stark, Princess Arianne. I was knighted before then and my lord uncle took this as the chance to know me better, for in my 8 and 10 years, we had only met 3 times, he replied. So, are you the heir to the Vale? She asked. No, princess. My cousin, Lord Robin Arryn, is my uncle's surviving son and heir, he replied. But is your company here not dull and boring, old men and little children? Do you not like some excitement and fun in your lives? She asked as she faced Robb with a salacious grin on her face. I find we have good enough company here, princess, though our duties keep us from having to fall victim to temptation of the finer things in life, Robb replied, though he was blushing red like a tomato as he said, which Arianne was enjoying watching. But too much duties and no time for fun makes someone very, very unhappy, Lord Stark. Even in the north you must have some form of fun, she said. A tempting but dangerous offer from a viper to a wolf, said Robb. Arianne grinned seductively whilst standing in front of him, to which he had to stop walking. She reached out and she brushed her hand on his cheek, which felt like a rough stubble against her soft hands. She could almost feel his body tense and his jaw clench as she did so. Vipers at least bite from the front, unlike the shit-faced snakes in King's Landing. She paused and looked at Robb from up and down. Harold too. But of course, there are so many other places that I can bite you, Lord Stark, she said whilst flashing her teeth and mimicking a bite, seductively. Harold never looked so happy to see the gates of the Red Keep before in the short time that he had been in King's Landing. Here we are, princess. The Red Keep, Harold said with a relieved smile. Princess Arianne turned to face the Red Keep, taking her hand away from Robb's face. Ah, it is magnificent, isn't it? Though the stench is something else. Not even the sewers of Sunspear stink like this, she commented in her exotic Dornish voice. She turned to face the Red Keep fully and walked with both Harold and Robb at her side. Harold glanced to Robb to see if he was okay. It looked as though he was quietly taking deep breaths through his nose. I need a drink, now, Harold thought. Please, old gods and new, don't let her see my erected cock, or I may just die of embarrassment. They walked inside the Red Keep's doors, to a courtier's loud and booming voice: Robb Stark, the heir to Winterfell. Arianne Martell, Princess of Dorne. Though not officially an Arryn and not officially heir to the Eyrie, Harold wasn't announced. But he didn't mind, for he knew that his cousin was unwell and that the chances of him survive his childhood were slim. The idea of being Lord of the Vale and Warden of the East were not particularly appealing to him. He liked being a knight and jousting and fighting in tourneys and practicing with his friends. Robb bowed to the king, followed by a quick and unladylike curtsy by Princess Arianne. Not surprising after all the Lannisters have done to her family and how this king has ignored the Martells' demands for justice. Glad to see that you're finding your way around King's Landing, Robb, my boy, said the king in a powerful and booming voice. His voice is the only part of him that has any power left, Harold thought. But he grinned when he saw Prince Joffrey look angry at how the king addressed Robb as Robb, my boy. Indeed, your grace. I have brought the Princess Arianne, heiress to Sunspear, said Robb with a polite smile. When the courtier announced them both, he referred to the Dornish princess as just a princess of Dorne. Yet Robb knew enough about Dorne to know that men and women both held equal succession rights. A fact that most in the south either ignored or forgot. But when Robb addressed Arianne as the heiress to Sunspear, she looked at him, not with lust as she had done so before, but with gratitude or respect. Robb stood aside as Princess Arianne walked past him, and as she did, she was gently brushing her hand against his upper body. She looked at him with one final grin before her hand left him. Robb walked towards Harold, sweating and blushing. Gendry, get us a few cups of water each. I think that we deserve it, Harold whispered to his squire. I'll get you a jug each, milords, he whispered back with a half-amused grin. Good man, he said before clapping him on his shoulder. Dornish whore, whispered a lady near them. Why are you looking at that Martell strumpet, Elbert, whispered yet another to her husband. I'm not sure if I could survive in Sunspear without falling into temptation, Harold joked. Another minute, and my throat would be dry, said Robb. He noticed that Queen Cersei looked outraged by what Arianne was wearing, as if she was a silent sister who had caught a whore strutting around the great September of Baelor completely naked. Gendry brought them a couple of water skins each. They quickly devoured the contents with ease whilst King Robert leered at Princess Arianne as she spoke, whilst the Queen glared at her husband. What's he doing? Robb wondered. Probably wondering whether or not to eat her or take her to bed, Harold remarked. Harold noticed Gendry look not at the princess large ass, as he and most other lords and a few ladies were doing, but at the king. He didn't look with amusement, astonishment or scorn at the king as some courtiers did, but there was something else, he could see. He decided not to enquire, at least not here. King Robert gave all the court leave. Robb said back to the yard. Definitely. We'll see you there soon after this court shit is over, Harold replied. Robb looked scared of something behind Harold. Harold looked behind and saw Princess Arianne looking at them both with a grin as if she was saying, I'll see you later. Well, you best keep your bedchambers under close guard lest she sneak into them just as you are about to go to bed, Harold joked. What? Why me? She was looking at you too, Robb replied. Yes, but you always look her in the eye, never at her dress, her tits, her ass or any part of her body like me and everyone else. I've come across enough women to know that this one likes a challenge and she sees you as such, Harold replied. I'll need more water before we spar. Her presence does leave one breathless, Robb replied before he took his leave. That it does, my friend, that it does, Harold thought as he and Gendry were left alone. Whilst we wait for Robb in the yard, how about we practice more on your fighting, Gendry? Harold offered. Thank you, milord. That would be good, he replied. Good man. Now, let's get going. But before they could go anywhere, they were stopped from going anywhere by a little man with a moustache and small beard. Lord Petyr Baelish, otherwise known as Littlefinger, whom was the master of coin. Lord Baelish. I do beg your pardon, Harold said politely as he tried to get past the most noteworthy whoremonger and money-obsessed scoundrel in the Seven Kingdoms. My apologies, Sir Harold, I just wanted to speak to you both, he said creepily, whilst also glancing at Gendry. What does he want with my squire? Harold may have only known Gendry for a week, but he liked him. And he especially didn't like Littlefinger anywhere near him or his squire. What is your name, lad? He asked Gendry. Gendry looked uncomfortable and said, I'm Gendry Storm, my lord. Storm. A Stormlander bastard and a squire to a poor knight of the Vale and forgotten nephew of Lord Arryn, said Littlefinger. Harold disliked this arrogant shit-piece before, and now he really despised him. His fists clenched together and he said with a smirk, Lord Baelish, only recently I heard a story about you losing a duel to a young Stark over the hand of Catelyn Tully, the mother of Lord Robb Stark. Is that all true? Littlefinger glanced at him with a look of annoyance, but he also scratched his upper body, not as if there was an itch, but as if there was an old wound there that was haunting him. Yes, that's true, Sir Harold. I apologize if I offended you just now. I was just very curious as to how your squire came into your service when he's already been in the service of Lord Arryn for a long time, Littlefinger said before glancing back at Gendry. What's he hoping that I will do? Demand to have answers from Gendry on his secrets. Gendry looked uncomfortable. Gendry. Go and prepare the yard for myself and Robb. If he's there already, tell him I shall be there shortly, Harold told him. Gendry looked relieved and said, right away, my lord. He walked very fast away before Harold turned back to face Littlefinger. What's the Master of Coin's interest in my squire? Don't you have more feasts for his grace to pay for or more gold dragons to conjure up from out of thin air for yet another tourney? Sir Harold asked. Littlefinger just gave a sly grin, like a fox licking its fangs as it nears a henhouse. I'm just interested, Sir Harold. The world is a very interesting place and there's so much to learn about it every day. One might think you were the Master of Whispers rather than the Master of Coin, Harold remarked. Oh, I'm sure you're aware that I'm more than capable of doing two jobs at once, Sir Harold. Good day. That's right, fuck off and drown yourself in gold before I make you drown in your own blood, Harold thought. What did he mean? Harold wondered as Littlefinger walked away. Why was he so interested in Gendry? He's never shown me that much interest before. Did this have anything to do with when Gendry was staring, not looking, at the king in court just a few minutes ago? So many questions were on Harold's mind, but for the time being, he had decided not to pry any answers from Gendry. He liked him. He was a good squire and a keen learner. Most squires Harold had come across over the years were highborn squires, and they were bumbling and puny idiots like his lord uncle's squire, Hugh, whom thought very high of himself as though he was going to be made a knight soon just because he was squire to the hand of the king. And the king's squire, Lancel Lannister, was an idiot whom the king could easily mock, and Lancel Lannister didn't even stand his ground or try to stand up for himself, when this man was a cousin of the queen and nephew of Tywin Lannister. Is he a eunuch like Varys the Spider? I need to clear my head with some fighting or some jousting or even just a ride around the Kingswood on Stormwing, Harold thought as he left court. But what he really wanted was to go back to the Vale. The woman Sissy must have given birth to his bastard by now. I want to meet my child and do all that I can for it, he thought. Chapter 6, Chapter 4. Chapter Text. Tyrion 2. Well, that was certainly interesting to watch, Tyrion thought as he left the courtroom. He was amused by how angry Cersei looked at Robert whilst trying to compose herself. Arianne Martell certainly had an interesting effect on people. And Robb Stark, his icy and cold Stark honor kept him under control, which only seemed to interest the Dornish princess in him even more. Tyrion knew that the Martells were interested in King's Landing and that they were wanting revenge against the Lannisters for the losses they had suffered in Robert's rebellion. Prince Doran Martell had lost his uncle, Prince Luwin Martell, commander of the Kingsguard, in battle, but most horrifically, Princess Elia, wife of Rhaegar Targaryen, was raped and murdered by Gregor Clegane after watching her infant son Aegon get murdered by Clegane, and her little daughter Princess Rhaenys was murdered in her bed by Sir Amory Lorque. The Martells had never forgotten what they had suffered in that war. Nor had all Dorne. A fact that Tyrion's father, Lord Tywin, always dismissed, and yet he still expected that once Joffrey was king, they would fall to heel. But Tyrion knew better. He knew that his nephew was a cruel little cunt, and that once he was king, he would either start a war or a war would start because of his vicious and twisted nature. But Tyrion was never unamused when he saw Joffrey's jealousy when Robert showed more favor to Robb Stark rather than to Joffrey. And, as standard procedure in Joffrey's behavior, he knew that Joffrey would pick a weak target to bully and torture to take his anger out on. And, Tyrion knew just who such targets would be. He walked into the gardens and saw Myrcella and Tommen playing with Tommen's little kitten Sir Pounce. Tyrion always enjoyed playing with them, they were the only good accomplishment of Cersei had ever done, but Joffrey was an evil and spoiled little tyrant, made only worse by Cersei mollycoddling and overindulging him and never teaching him as their lord father Tywin had taught them. He saw Joffrey walking out of the Red Keep and into the gardens, with his sworn sword, Sandor Clegane, the Hound, close behind him. Joffrey was furious, as he had expected, and he was looking around. Tyrion noticed that Joffrey had an ugly dagger tucked in his belt. I hope he does challenge Robb Stark to a duel and that Robb Stark either cuts his hand off or cripples him, or even better, wounds his cock and balls to the extent that Joffrey must be emasculated. That would amuse Tyrion to no end. But right now, he had to do something to stop Joffrey from harming Myrcella, Tommen and Sir Pounce. He spotted Robb Stark sitting in the practice yard nearby, wearing practice leather armor. Perfect, Tyrion thought. He approached Robb as quickly as he could and said, Lord Stark, I wonder if I could borrow you for a moment. Lord Tyrion? Robb asked politely. Tyrion liked Robb and his friend, Sir Harold, for they never addressed him as imp or mocked him for being a dwarf or for his drinking or whoring habits like many members of his own family had done. But Stark and Arryn both just addressed him as they would any other man or lord. Joffrey is in a foul mood and he usually takes it all out on Myrcella or Tommen. And right now, he has a dagger which I'm worried that he'll use it on Tommen's kitten, Sir Pounce, Tyrion said. Robb's eyes opened wide and he immediately knew what Tyrion was talking about. He quickly stood up and turned to Sir Harold's squire and said, Gendry, tell Sir Harold that we'll have to find another time to fight in the yard. I will, my lord, said Gendry the squire. Robb followed Tyrion into the gardens. But he briefly stopped, and picked some flowers from a garden bed. But not just any flowers, Tyrion noticed. Lavender. Well remembered, Tyrion thought. Robb continued following him as they got to Myrcella and Tommen, just as Tommen was laying on his back and petting Sir Pounce, whom was laying on Tommen's chest. Are you two having fun? Tyrion asked as they turned the corner to see them. Myrcella and Tommen looked up to see them and they both smiled at Tyrion, and Myrcella blushed as she realized that Robb was there with Tyrion. Hello, Myrcella. Would you like these? He asked as he sat down on the ground next to them and gave her the lavender flowers. She beamed at them and at him before blushing again. Now what do you say to Robb, Myrcella? Tyrion asked. Thank you, she said with a shy smile before she smelled the lavender and tucking one of them in her hair above her ear. That's all right. And how are you, Sir Pounce? Tackling down the young Prince Tommen. Robb asked as he stroked Sir Pounce's back. And it was then that Tyrion turned around to see Joffrey and the Hound joining them. Ah, come to join in on the fun, Joffrey? Tyrion asked. I'm actually going to have my own fun, imp, he said, scowling whilst gripping his dagger hard, as though he was stopping himself from trying to stab Tyrion. Out of the corner of Tyrion's eye, he noticed Robb realize what was going on and he said to Myrcella and Tommen, would you all like to see my direwolf? A direwolf? Aren't they extinct? Myrcella asked. No. They live in the north and beyond the wall, Robb asked. Yes, can we? Tommen asked enthusiastically. Of course, you can, my prince, said Robb, and he helped them stand up and Tommen held Sir Pounce in his arms protectively when he saw Joffrey. He was scared. Myrcella was scared. Robb stood with his arms crossed and was defiantly standing between them and Joffrey. He was staring Joffrey down, as if daring him to try and attack him with his dagger. Ah, Prince Joffrey. This is an honor. And a pleasure, a beautiful and exotic voice said from at the back of the gardens. Tyrion could see Princess Arianne. Joffrey turned around and looked with lust and hunger at the Dornish princess as she ran her fingers through her long and curled hair and then waved it around. Joffrey discreetly passed his dagger back to the Hound and faced Princess Arianne. Princess Arianne. I am sorry that I could not have the honor of welcoming you to King's Landing. Allow me the honor of showing you around the Red Keep, he said in his skillful way of appearing to be charming, whilst leering at her revealing dress. Arianne made a curtsy to Joffrey, to show off her dress more, and yet, Tyrion noticed a cunning grin on her face. She is not at all charmed by Joffrey, she is up to something. Are the Martells determined to wed into the two families which wrought so much evil onto their own and gave them no justice? No, she has her own motives, he thought as Joffrey talked with her. He noticed how he was puffing his chest out and trying to make himself look bigger and taller, with little success. The likes of Robb Stark and Harold Hardang must make him feel so puny and so small. "Thank you, Lord Stark," Tyrion whispered to Robb as he walked past with Myrcella and Tommen as they saw Joffrey walk inside the Red Keep. "I'm glad to be of help, Lord Tyrion," he replied. "May I accompany you? I've yet to meet your direwolf." "Of course. I'd keep him with me in the Tower of the Hand, but Her Grace fears for the safety of all of those inside the Red Keep from him," he said whilst glancing around. "Quite right, Robb, there's always someone listening. If not one of my sister's spies, one of Littlefinger's or one of Varys' spies." They had arrived at the main stables inside the Red Keep, and in a large stall was an enormous wolf. With smoke-colored fur and Baratheon yellow-colored eyes, this wolf, only just the same size as a fully grown donkey, approached Robb. Robb held his hand out and the wolf licked its master's hand, and Robb stroked his head and just behind his ears. "This is Grey Wind," he said, turning to face Tyrion, Myrcella and Tommen. "Hold your hand out. It's okay. He won't bite." "He would be growling if he was going to bite," he said. "Can he sense danger?" Tyrion asked. "He can. He's very sharp and he's very clever," Robb explained as Myrcella held her hand out. Grey Wind licked her hand, she whimpered slightly. Robb didn't laugh, he just smiled and said it's okay. "He does that if he likes you, princess." Myrcella, emboldened by this, held her hand out again and Grey Wind licked her again and she giggled and then stroked his head. Tommen held out Sir Pounce. Sir Pounce didn't look afraid and he climbed onto Grey Wind's back and Grey Wind didn't growl or complain. "Sir Pounce is very brave, just like you, my prince," Robb said. Tommen blushed, no one had ever called him brave, not even his mother. This encouraged him to stroke Grey Wind and at one point started to hug him. Grey Wind licked his face, at which Tommen giggled and Myrcella hugged him as well. Robb grabbed a bucket of meat pieces and offered them to Tommen and Myrcella. They fed Grey Wind and on one occasion, Sir Pounce licked Grey Wind's head. Grey Wind licked Sir Pounce, which licked up half of his entire body. Sir Pounce then jumped back onto Grey Wind's back. A Kingsguard knight approached the stables. It was Jaime. Tyrion saw him look at Myrcella and Tommen playing with Grey Wind and Sir Pounce. Robb looked up and he said, "I offered them to see Grey Wind, Sir Jaime. He hasn't hurt them or scared them." Jaime held his hand up as if to say that he wasn't angry. "It's not an issue, Stark. I'm just here to take my nephew and niece to dinner." "Can Grey Wind come with us, Uncle Jaime?" Tommen asked. "I'm afraid not, Tommen. Your mother is quite scared of him," Jaime said with an affectionate smile as he knelt to face Tommen and mess with his hair. "Your mother is not as brave as you are, Tommen. You've shown how brave you are by talking to Grey Wind, when most boys your age or older, or even men, would run away from him," Tyrion remarked. That seemed to encourage Tommen and he started standing straighter as though he could imagine himself as a brave knight one day. "Good night, Princess Myrcella." "Good night, Prince Tommen," Robb said as Tommen picked up Sir Pounce. They said goodbye to Robb and then to Grey Wind. "Good night, Sir Jaime," Robb said. Jaime nodded with a polite smile before escorting Tommen and Myrcella inside. Robb continued feeding Grey Wind some meat. Jaime had told Tyrion how when he and Robb Stark first met. Robb was alone in the court and he asked Jaime if he was standing near where his grandfather Rickard and Uncle Brandon were murdered. Jaime told him it was and told him a story that he had only told Tyrion, Cersei and father. How in his last moments, the Mad King ordered for the whole city to be destroyed by wildfire rather than let it get sacked by Tyrion's father in the last act of the war, just after Rhaegar's death at the Trident and Robert's victory. He had even ordered Jaime to kill his own father and bring his head to the Mad King. Jaime had only told that story to a select few, for he was too angry to tell people who called him Kingslayer to his face and behind his back as to why he would break his oath as a Kingsguard and murder his king, one of those being Robb Stark's father. He probably thinks that Rob had a right to know what happened to his uncle and his grandfather, Tyrion thought. Tyrion noticed that Jaime liked Rob, for he didn't judge him, scorn him or call him Kingslayer as many others had done so, including Rob's father. He thanked him for avenging his grandfather and his uncle. "Good night, Stark. And thank you again, for stepping up for my niece and nephew. I am hoping that one day Joffrey does get his head kicked in for all that's he done and all that he wants to do," he said. "I am glad to be of help, Lord Tyrion." "Good night," he said as he nodded to Tyrion and then resumed petting Grey Wind. And it was as Tyrion was walking back inside the Red Keep that he saw Arianne Martell. She was walking towards the stables, making a beeline for Robb Stark. "Did you seduce my odious nephew, Princess, or did he explode with anticipation?" Tyrion asked. "Neither, Lord Tyrion. He was more interested when he was told a new crossbow had arrived for him, decorated with lions," she replied. "That sounds like him. Now, are you looking for someone to warm your bed tonight?" "I am not quite what you're used to, but I promise to do what can," Tyrion jokingly offered. "As curious as I have been to find out how good dwarfs are with their cocks and their mouths, I already have a bed warmer for tonight," she replied before turning to face Robb Stark. If he can resist her, I would be truly impressed, Tyrion thought as he suddenly felt thirsty and in need of a few bottles of Arbor Gold. Rob 3. Rob stroked the back of Grey Wind's ears a few times. "It won't be much longer, my friend. Soon we'll be back home in the north and not in this stinking and sweltering shitpile of a city," Rob thought as Grey Wind looked affectionately at Rob and was about to curl up and go back to bed. Rob heard a gentle rhythm of footsteps coming towards him. He turned around and saw Princess Arianne. "Good evening, Princess Arianne," he said nervously. "Please, call me Ari. I like being called that. It's what my cousins call me," she explained. "Well then, you may call me Rob," he replied. He noticed how she looked as though she wasn't trying to seduce him. "I admire you, Rob. You show great restraint. I've not seen on any man or woman ever since I lost my maidenhead," she said. "Well, unlike plenty of Southerners, honor is more than just a word to me. It's a part of me," he explained. "So, I see. And, I hope that we can be friends whilst I am in King's Landing," she offered. We can be friends. For how long are you in King's Landing, Ari?" he asked. She smiled when he called her by her nickname. "For the next 4 days. After that, I shall return home and see if my father truly does intend on robbing me of my heritage," she replied. "Your father would not see you inherit Sunspear?" Rob asked in surprise. "He didn't tell me that, though he didn't tell me otherwise. My father has been corrupted by the influences of our neighbors in the Reach and the Stormlands with regards to succession laws." "If that did happen, what would you do?" Rob asked. "I don't know. I have been preparing to be Princess of Dawn ever since I was a little girl. But to have all it taken from me and handed to my brother is indescribable. There's no greater betrayal than to be betrayed by those that you love and trust," she said. Rob nodded. Though he had never been betrayed, he knew that to be betrayed by any of his brothers, sisters or friends, would leave a dark mark on Rob which he didn't think anything would heal. "So, did you enjoy your walk with Prince Joffrey?" Rob asked, whilst making his usual glance around at his surroundings despite it becoming dark. "He can certainly be charming. But we weren't walking around for long. Her Grace, the Queen, must have feared for his innocence, for she came herself to fetch him and entice him with a new crossbow rather than spend time with me. She gave me a dangerous scowl before she and the prince left," Arianne replied. The words Joffrey and innocence don't belong in the same sentence, Rob thought. "What are you keeping here? A horse to kidnap me and take me to Winterfell with you to keep your bed hot during the winter?" she asked in a jesting tone of voice. "Ari, if I did that, I don't think I'd ever be forgiven by my lady mother, my lord father or your family." "No. It's my direwolf, Grey Wind. I've just been giving him his dinner," he explained. Intrigued, Arianne stepped towards the stall to see for herself. "Hello, Grey Wind," she said. Grey Wind stood up from his bed and walked towards Arianne as she lay a hand out. "Is it safe to do this?" she asked. Rob nodded and said he would growl if he didn't like you. "But he does seem to like you." "How can he not?" Rob suddenly thought. Robb stood straight when he realized what he said inwardly and watched as Grey Wind licked Ariane's hand, nuzzled against her wrist and looked lovingly at her. "Oh, aren't you a handsome little wolf?" she asked as she stroked his head. Robb said you can also tickle him behind his ears. He loves it when someone does that. She did just that and Grey Wind licked her again before yawning. He then walked back to bed. "Don't take it personally. He's just been entertaining Princess Myrcella and Prince Tommen and playing with Tommen's kitten Sir Pounce." "I wouldn't take it personally," she replied before she raised her hand and she started tickling Robb behind his ear and running her hand through his auburn curls. Her hand felt so soft, like the thin silk dress she wore. "Do you like it when I do that to you?" she asked with an amused grin. "Do you want me to growl at you?" Robb asked, half amused himself. "I think I'd rather that you lick me than growl." "Like wolf, like master," she replied. They chuckled and Robb felt weird. Hearing her chuckle like this made his heart beat really fast. "So, how much longer are you staying in this shitpile of a city before returning home?" Ariane asked. 3 days hence. My lady mother would like me to be back home in time for my name day," he explained. "How old will you turn?" she asked. 7 and 10, he replied. She grinned and said, "I thought that you would be older." "I will turn 2 and 20 a few moons from now. Most Dornishmen when they are your age have fucked both men and women." Robb tried to find the right words to say but Ariane caught on before he could say anything. "Oh. Is the heir to Winterfell and the North not innocent like a little maiden?" "Have you lain with women before?" she asked teasingly. "A few times, yes, Ari," he replied. "But Honor didn't tell you to marry any of them?" she asked. "It was a couple of years ago, Ari, before I learned what honor truly is," he explained. "So, why have you come to King's Landing, Ari? We both know that this city is a stinking pile of shit with snakes and scorpions wherever you turn," he said. She stopped smiling and asked, "Is there somewhere we can talk?" Robb caught on to what she was asking of and said, "In the Kingswood." They went by Robb's horse and rode into the Kingswood and to a small stream flowing by a bloody mess, left by King Robert, where his most recent prey had been killed. Ariane spoke her mind. "My father wanted me to come here to find out how strong the Lannister influences are. As you've seen all around the Red Keep, it's very strong," Robb said. "Indeed. And in Sunspear, we were surprised to find out that you of all people were in King's Landing," she explained. "Why?" he asked. "Well, your Lord Father's distaste for the politics of the Seven Kingdoms and the intrigues of the Game of Thrones is famous. Even despite what side your father fought on in the rebellion, none in Dorne hold any contempt for your family or for the North," she explained. "You speak of Elia Martell and her children," Robb realized. "I do. And, in the nearly 20 years since they were murdered, no justice has been brought. Either by King Robert or by Tywin Lannister. Jon Arryn has spoken of trying to bring justice in the past, but it's never happened. We all know of how he and your father tried to bring justice, but Robert the usurper has never given a damn. Are you and your family also aware of how your family wasn't the only family to lose loved ones in the rebellion?" Robb asked. "We are. And for that, I am sorry," she said, and her apology did look sincere. Robb saw her for who she truly was. She isn't a whore, a harlot or a strumpet as the queen or the ladies of court think of her or the stories paint her as. All her physical beauty is a weapon for her to use. She loves her family and she loves Dorne. She has a kind and caring soul and is not without feeling. But, Robb, your family had justice in the end, even though it had been brought you by a Lannister and a Baratheon who is now the king," she said. "True. Now, Ari, my Lord Father has no love for the Lannisters. Neither does my guardian, Lord Arryn. I can promise you that. And, if I was able to, I would do all that I could to bring justice to Dorne in the form of Gregor Clegane and Amory Lorque. I believe you, Robb. I do. But, how can one accomplish either of those? They are trusted bannermen of Tywin Lannister and are his weapons of spreading terror to all of his enemies. And his daughter is queen and his grandson will be king one day. How would you bring justice to Dorne when the Lannisters have that much power?" she said. "If Dorne has a foothold in King's Landing, alongside the North, the Vale and the Riverlands, then together, not even the great and mighty Tywin Lannister would have a chance of standing up to half of Westeros, no matter how many allies he might try to gain," Robb replied. Wishful thinking, at best, Robb. You may be a good and honorable man, but you forget that not all people in the kingdoms are honorable, she pointed out. And those players of the Game of Thrones forget that not all people in the kingdoms are like them and that they have honor and would gladly stand up to them. Do you play in the Game of Thrones, Robb? Or do you despise it? She asked as she edged closer to him. I hate the game, but I think that if I had no choice, I would do what I could to play it, he replied. She smiled briefly before saying, that seems to be the reason that Must would play the game. That's so, said Robb. Arianne looked at him in the face as if trying to study him and asked, what do you think of me, Robb? Do you think I'm a whore or a harlot? No, Ari. I don't. I know that you use your beauty as a weapon and that your mind is sharper than most and that you use it when idiot men and foolish women lower their guard around you. You are stronger and smarter than what people claim about you, Robb replied honestly. In response, Arianne looked pleasantly surprised, as if no one had ever said anything like that about her before. Robb looked at the moon suddenly and said, it's getting late. We should be getting back. They rode back to the Red Keep and Robb said, good night, princess. Good night, handsome young wolf. Hearing her say those words made him blush and made his heart race. Chapter 7, Chapter 5. Chapter text. Catelyn 2. Sansa, may you join your father and I? Asked Catelyn as she walked inside Septa Mordane's quarters. Of course, mother, she said dutifully and diligently. She reminds me when I was her age, Catelyn thought as she proudly looked at her fine stitching, of the Stark sigil and the Tully sigil combined into one, under the supervision of Septa Mordane. My apologies for interrupting your lesson, Septa, she said before leaving. There is none required, Lady Stark, she replied politely. Catelyn saw Arya unhappy with her stitching. Catelyn hoped that Arya would grow out of her adventurous spirit. She tried to interest her in dresses to wear for welcoming vassals and bannermen to Winterfell. But no matter how hard she tried, Arya would always find some way to escape from such things and was more interested in riding her horse around Winterfell, the Godswood, and shoot arrows on the range with Theon. She and Sansa walked upstairs to Ned Solar. He was preparing a letter as he was sitting down. He looked up and he beamed with happiness at seeing Sansa. Sansa. Hello. How are your lessons? He asked. Really well, father. Septa Mordane was very impressed with my stitching, she said proudly. Well, I'll have to look at it later. But now, Sansa, we have some news for you. From Robb in King's Landing. Is it confirmed? Will I be betrothed to Prince Joffrey? She asked excitedly. Ned raised his hand slightly and said, Sansa, please calm down and sit. She did as she was told and sat opposite her parents whilst Catelyn sat next to her husband. Sansa, I know that you want to marry Prince Joffrey, but everything that Robb says about Prince Joffrey is not good, said Ned. No. That cannot be. I want to marry Joffrey. Robb's just jealous that he won't be in King's Landing or have a position in power. Sansa insisted. Sansa. That's your brother you're talking about. Catelyn reminded her. Sansa calmed down and Catelyn picked up Robb's most recent letter, which mentioned Joffrey's attempt to torture or murder the pet kitten of Prince Tommen for no other reason than to take his anger out on something. She passed it to Sansa and said, read it for yourself. Sansa read it. She read the passages about Joffrey several times over. But this is just one letter, Sansa said. There's 4 more, Catelyn said, and she handed each of them over to Sansa. Sansa read each of them and Ned asked her once she had finished, Sansa, do you trust your older brother over someone you've never ever met and only heard of in stories and whispers from travelers and passers-by? Sansa thought about this and said, no, I would trust my brother. Quite right. So, do you believe in Robb's words about the Crown Prince and how he is unworthy to be your husband and, in Robb's own words, no woman should ever be married to such an evil man, whom the spirit of Mad King Aerys lives on in? Catelyn asked. I believe Robb, said Sansa, who looked as though she was betrayed by the fantasies of marrying Prince Joffrey and what she imagines him to be like. But Robb has mentioned one friend of his whom he thinks would be a worthy and good husband to you. His name is Sir Harold Hardyng. He is the great-nephew of Lord Jon Arryn. He is only a few years older than Robb. He is unmatched in the lance in the Vale and one of the best sword fighters in the Vale, and he and Robb have duels lasting over an hour in their sparring in the Red Keep. He also mentions that he is a very handsome young man and is kind and caring and very good to his friends and even treats his bastard squire as he would any knight of noble birth. John Arryn also writes that he will award a lordship of a newly built castle to Sir Harold, Ned said. The mention of a bastard squire serving Sir Harold annoyed Catelyn. She loathed bastards, simply because of Jon Snow and his presence in Winterfell and in her husband's household and growing up alongside her children. Her children loved him as one of them, she knew. But that didn't mean that she could. That her husband could betray her and his sacred honor for a woman, probably a tavern maid or a whore, and brought the seed of their union home with him and raising him alongside his true-born children, that was worse than 10 bastards. Sansa, we won't force you to marry him, but he does seem like a very good choice. He is only a few years older than you, he is a brave and good knight and he is second in line to becoming Lord of the Eyrie. The fact that Robb thinks him good enough for you says everything, said Ned. I will. I shall marry him, but when I come of age, Sansa said. Very wise choice. You're becoming more like your mother by the day, Ned said with a loving smile, and he hugged her and kissed her on the forehead. A fortunate thing that Jon Arryn agreed to award his grandnephew the newly built castle in the Vale. Now Sansa would be married into a part of House Arryn and married to a good young man, according to Robb. Harold 3. Robb was to soon leave King's Landing. Harold was upset, for he was going to miss a man whom he considered his best friend. He had made plenty of friends growing up as a squire and in the household of Lord Royce. But with Robb, he felt like he was the brother he had always wished for, and they did everything together, except adventuring to brothels. Harold was often bored and in search of excitement. But he had never ever gone to any of the brothels owned by Littlefinger. But it was on Robb's second last day in King's Landing that he came to Harold in the yard, holding a letter from a raven sent by his parents. Harold, a moment of your time, he said, as Harold has been training with Gendry. Harold and Gendry stopped and Harold said, take a moment and drink some water, Gendry. Yes, my lord, he replied. Gendry was getting better at blocking, dodging and using his hammer, Harold was glad to see. But he still wasn't willing to pry into Gendry's personal problems. Come to be beaten by me at last, Stark, he jested. No. Some of this letter concerns you, he said. What? Harold asked, surprised. Why should it concern me? What are his parents interested in me about? Previously, my lord father had asked if I thought Prince Joffrey would be a suitable match for my sister, Sansa. But we both know that neither would be suitable for the other, Robb said whilst glancing around the yard. It had become nature to look at one's surroundings, for one couldn't know if the nearest servant was a spy in the service of either Queen Cersei, Lord Varys or Littlefinger. Especially when it was concerning the Crown Prince and any future potential bride. Aye, that much is true. I'm sure that she would not like to be so far from home in a place like King's Landing. Not when the climate is so much more different than Winterfell, said Harold, whilst glancing around. So, I recommended you, Robb explained. What? Me? Why me? He asked in surprise, giving Robb his undivided attention. I know you to be a good man. A man of honor and a kind man. I know that you would treat her well and that you are the sort of man that she has always dreamed of marrying, a brave and chivalrous knight, he explained. Harold was flattered and honored that Robb considered him those things and that he thought him a good enough man to be married to his younger sister. But, Robb, I am a knight without any lands or estates. In the Eyrie, I would have a small house, and here I have a chamber in the Tower of the Hand. Any children from such a union would be landless, he explained. Robb smiled slightly, as though he knew something that he wasn't going to tell Harold. But Lord Arryn is one of the best and kindest of men. He would most assuredly award you some land. He wouldn't want one of his last relations to be without land or a secure future. We both know that. And he loves you, and he wouldn't have invited you to attend small council sessions if he didn't think that you have potential, Robb replied. Will you let me consider it? Harold asked. Of course. Take all the time that you need, Robb replied. I pray that my lord uncle does award me some lands. I don't want any children of mine to be landless if I was to marry a lady of a great and long-standing family such as the Starks of Winterfell. And so, Harold turned to face the statue of Baelor, where he could see just the top half. O Baelor the Blessed, old gods and new, I vow that from this day forth, I shall never go near a brothel and never shall I take a woman to bed other than my wife, he inwardly prayed. He and Rob duelled for a few minutes before practicing with Gendry. He now started to use a shield and a large hammer. He was strong enough to use both and he could defend with his shield and attack with his hammer. Harold was proud of how well Gendry was doing at fighting and he hoped to see him become a knight one day. Maybe we can joust together in a tourney, Harold thought as the three sat together in the shade and drank water and Rob started to tell them a story. So, I was bringing Sansa, Arya and Bran to the Winterfell crypts, where all Starks have been buried for the last 8,000 years, from the Kings of Winter to today. I started telling them about Brandon the Builder and how he built the wall and how it was to keep out the White Walkers and all kinds of monsters beyond the wall. But then I told them how the White Walkers had cursed Brandon the Builder to kill all his living descendants for building the wall. And as soon as I finished that, Jon and Theon ran at them, covered in bread flour and snow and holding up great big spears, also covered in flour and snow. And I swear, by the old gods, they screamed so loud that all of Winterfell could hear them and ran outside and were screaming for the gods until they saw us all laughing. Harold and Gendry laughed and they heard a voice call to them. A particularly long fight, lads? Lord Arryn asked. They looked up and stood up as the hand of the king stepped onto the yard to see them. It was a long fight, Lord Arryn. Gendry is getting a lot better with his hammer and shield, Rob said. Good man, Gendry. Good man. Now, Rob and Harold, I am having dinner with my family in the tower this evening and I would be honored if you both would join us. Also joining us shall be Princess Arianne. Whilst Gendry looked proud of how Harold's uncle praised him, Harold couldn't help but notice Rob gulped at the mention of the Dornish princess. Rob had told him about their ride into the Kingswood and how they talked and how it seemed that the two were friends. Gendry warned him, be careful, my lord. It could be a trick to lower your guard and then she will have you. He's right, she could be plotting something wicked to get you into bed with her, Harold said with a cheeky grin. I would be honored to dine with you and your family, my lord, said Harold, noticing that Rob seemed too nervous to say anything. It might just be in case he appeared too keen, Harold thought. As will I, said Rob. Thought as much, Harold thought with a smirk. Wonderful. I'll expect you to join us by the hour of the bat, Lord Arryn said, and he bid them goodbye before leaving. Ah, it will be boring when you leave, Rob. Who will I find to fight in a good duel lasting over an hour rather than the pathetic competition I had found myself with before you came to King's Landing? Most fights with any of them would have lasted less than a minute. But now they'll last shorter than 20 seconds, if not 10, Harold wondered as he, Gendry and Rob sat back down again. The Crown Prince perhaps? Gendry said. No, Gendry. The Crown Prince would never fight common, lowly and unlanded knights such as I, Harold replied with a modest grin at his own sarcasm. Then why is the Crown Prince coming here in armor, my lord? Gendry asked. Wait, what? Harold looked up and saw indeed, Joffrey and the Hound were walking, nay marching, towards the yard, followed closely by a dozen Lannister red cloaks. Joffrey wore full plate red and gold armor, golden lion heads on his pauldrons and a red and gold lion image on the breastplate, all befitting a member of House Lannister. Have you been a naughty boy, Harold? Rob wondered. Me? Are you jesting? I'm always naughty, said Harold. Gendry looked particularly nervous, Harold noticed. Keep back, Gendry. No need in you becoming an enemy of him also, Harold said. Gendry quickly walked out of the training area whilst both Harold and Rob stood up to face Joffrey, whom they saw was holding his own sword, called Lion's Tooth, a castle-forged sword with a lion's head for a pommel. Hello, my prince. If you are here to spar with either of us, we would be honored with your company, Harold said politely with a cold smirk, whilst hoping he could break his nose with his shield. I have indeed come to fight. But not you, Hardime. No, I have come for the Dog of the North. Rob looked around as if he was looking for someone. Dog of the North. I see no northern dog here, my prince, said Rob. No, I see a direwolf right here, Harold added, gesturing to Rob. Here we have a falcon, Rob said, gesturing to Harold before he gestured to Joffrey, and here we have a kitten right in front of us, said Rob. He and Rob chuckled whereas Joffrey drew his sword. Fight me, Stark. You will fight me, if you think yourself a man, he said, pointing his sharp sword at Rob. Why say it twice, you idiot. And how is dressing in armor and picking an actual sword to fight someone with a practice sword going to prove yourself a man? Harold thought as he raised his eyebrow. That's a castle-forged steel sword, my prince, with a very sharp edge. We use blunted swords here, Robb said. I thought that you northerners are supposed to be tough. Are you afraid of that? Joffrey asked. No, just so you know that it will be doubly humiliating for you if you lose, Harold smugly said, though he inwardly corrected himself, doubly humiliating for you when you lose. The soldiers stood at the back and the hound stood on the yard sands whilst Gendry grabbed Robb's great sword and brought it to him. Gendry quickly ran from the yard, as though he was fearful of the gaze of the crown prince. Harold was now worried for both Robb and for Gendry. Has Gendry's family done something to anger either the Queen, Joffrey or any of the Lannisters? Harold wondered. Both Joffrey and Robb stood at the ready and Gendry reluctantly passed a shield to Joffrey. He snatched it without uttering a thanks, unlike Robb. Let's go up and out of the yard, Harold told Gendry. They walked near the Red Cloaks and Harold asked one of them, why do you accompany the prince? He has enough protection from his sworn sword. We protect the prince on the Queen's orders, my lord. Her Grace don't trust the Martell princess around him, he explained. Harold nodded and thought if that was what this was about. Did Joffrey challenge Robb to try and impress Arianne Martell? He really is a fucking idiot. She is clearly unlike any plain lady of the realm like the ones who come to King's Landing. She won't be impressed by a stupid show of courage and a duel for her honor. She's a princess of Dorne. She would be impressed by little if not virtues such as conviction and determination, like what Robb had shown when he didn't take a single look at Arianne below her face, Harold thought. Begin, shouted the hound. Joffrey struck down at Robb's greatsword. Robb held his ground well, for he was using a practice greatsword and was against someone with a sharpened sword. Harold noticed that Robb was trying to dodge Joffrey's blows to tire him on this hot and sunny day, especially since he was wearing heavy armor and wielding a long sword that it looked as though he wasn't used to wielding it in a duel. He probably uses that sword to hit his little brother and sister with, rather than fight. Gendry, go and get Captain Castle of the Stark Guards and Savardis of the Arryn Guards. Now. This could get unpleasant, Harold told Gendry. Yes, my lord, Gendry replied, and he ran as quickly away as he could. Joffrey repeatedly struck at Robb's greatsword. Robb would at this point was either parrying or dodging his sword, because he could see that Joffrey was tiring. Harold saw that when Robb dodged out of the way of Joffrey's sword, only to hit his greatsword down onto Joffrey's pauldron. Joffrey grunted as he dropped his shield. And it wasn't long before a Kingsguard arrived. Harold saw who it was when he took off his helmet, Sir Jaime Lannister. If you intend to add the killing of the heir to Winterfell to your credit, then it would be cowardly for he uses a practice sword, Harold wanted to say. What's going on here? Jaime asked loudly and sternly. Robb and Joffrey stopped and turned to face him. Prince Joffrey challenged me, Sir Jaime. And who am I to refuse a challenge from the prince, replied Robb. Robb. Watch out. Harold cried out. Without warning, Joffrey had used Jaime's distraction to attack Robb with a downward slice at his back. Robb defended himself with his sword, and as their swords slammed into each other midair, Robb pushed the pommel of his great sword up and into Joffrey's chin, and as he yelled in pain, Robb slammed his sword down onto Joffrey's own sword-wielding wrist, which had disarmed Joffrey. Harold smirked with delight at seeing Joffrey scream and hold his injured wrist, which had been protected by an armored wrist guard, but still his wrist was hurt, as his sword fell to his feet. Thinking that it was over, Robb pierced his sword into the sands and wiped the sweat forming on his brow and walked to the shade and to the water fountain. Good fight, my prince, Robb said. And as he did, Joffrey picked up his sword with his uninjured hand and ran at Robb. Oh, no you fucking don't. You fucking coward. Harold shouted as he jumped down onto the sands and ran at Joffrey and tackled him to the ground and punched him on the nose. His sword fell from his grip. Yield, prince, or this will get bloody for all of us, Harold spat with rage as he prepared his fist for another punch whilst Joffrey was grabbing his other hand holding him down. It was then that Robb turned around to face them. Get up, Harold, Robb said worriedly, pulling him from Joffrey, and as he pulled Harold away, Joffrey sat up. Don't. I was having so much fun. Harold snapped. Joffrey looked at both with pure looks of hatred. And it was then that Gendry had arrived with Jory Castle, Savardis Egan and 12 Stark and Arryn household guards. Jaime pulled up Joffrey and Joffrey threw his hand away when he was standing up. "Leave me alone," he said to his uncle. "Is all okay down here?" asked Savardis. "Yes, just a little disagreement over the victor of a playful duel, Savardis. Just boys getting a little too carried away," said Jaime. "Isn't that so, my prince?" he whispered, turning to face Joffrey with a stern and angry glare. "Are you ashamed that he's your nephew, Kingslayer? I would be too." Joffrey spat at the ground twice and picked up Lion's tooth before pointing it at them. "I'll be king one day. And when I am, I will castrate you both and use you for target practice with my crossbow," he said furiously. "You still have sand in your beautiful hair, my prince. And now your blood pours from your nose all over your handsome face," Harold said with a boyish grin as Robb let go of him. Joffrey spat again and pathetically kicked sand at them, and Jaime grabbed him by the right pauldron of his armor and began to drag him, and they were followed by the Hound and the Lannister soldiers. Gendry avoided Joffrey's hateful gaze as he returned to the yard, and Jory asked Robb and Harold, "Are you both all right? You don't need to see a maester, do you?" "No, I'm fine," Jory said. "Robb, probably just a bruise, but not bad, Captain Castle," said Harold. "Even if I was wounded, I wouldn't go to see Pycelle," Harold commented as Jory, Savardis and the Stark and Arryn retainers had left. "Why not? Is he a bad man?" Gendry asked as he gave the two some water. "He is. He enjoys the company of young whores a little too much. If rumors are true, Queen Cersei won't let him anywhere near Princess Myrcella if she was ill," Harold replied. "And he sings the praises of Tywin Lannister," Robb added. "The only thing that old fart does sing about. But that did feel good to beat that little shit," Harold commented. It did. Though I dread the day he is crowned king. If I become Lord of Winterfell whilst he is king, he will humiliate me and my family when he demands I swear fealty to him," said Robb. "And then there's me, a lowly knight as he calls me. He'll make my life like the seven hells if he gets the chance," Harold said. "Making powerful enemies, milords," commented Gendry. "That we are," Robb said with a grin. Robb and Harold toasted with their cups of water. Powerful enemies. Chapter 8, Chapter 6. Chapter text. Gendry 2. Gendry had started making it a habit to try and avoid getting in the way of any Lannister or any of the king's children or even any of the small council. Anyone whom Lord Arryn said he couldn't trust. The only member of the small council whom Lord Arryn seemed to trust was the Master of Ships, Lord Stannis Baratheon, brother of the king, which meant that he was Gendry's uncle. Gendry had met Lord Stannis on one occasion when he was going with Harold to the Tower of the Hand, and they passed Lord Stannis. "My lord," said Harold, bowing his head to the Lord of Dragonstone. Gendry bowed his head to Lord Stannis, and Stannis looked at Gendry. The look he gave reminded him when he first met Lord Arryn. Stannis' face betrayed no emotion, though his eyes widened as though he recognized something about him. "He sees his brother, my father, in me," Gendry realized. "Milord," Gendry said, bowing his head. "Sir Harold." Squire Stannis said before leaving the two. "The Baratheon brothers couldn't be more different," Harold commented. "How many are there, milord?" Gendry asked. 3. The king, Stannis, and the youngest, Renly. The king, well, you've seen him. Stannis is the Lord of Dragonstone and the Master of Ships, and he is as cold and as honorable as a Stark. Stannis held Storm's End for a whole year against the entire Tyrell army in Robert's rebellion and preferred to eat book bindings and boot leather rather than surrender to Mace Tyrell. And then there is Renly. He is the Lord of Storm's End and Lord Paramount of the Stormlands and is the Master of Laws. Though he is no warrior, he is a good man and is more handsome than his brothers, and he enjoys parties, is always good to all people, from small folk to nobles, and he's very close to the great knight, Sir Loras Tyrell, the famed Knight of Flowers, Harold explained. "Close like you and Lord Robb are close, milord?" Gendry asked innocently. "Oh, no, Gendry. No, not like Robb and I. Robb is my best friend. Loras and Renly, on the other hand, are close like those two are close," said Harold, pointing at a young knight in a lover's embrace with a lady of court, as if no one could see them. "Is that not sinful?" Gendry asked naively, realizing what he meant. "It is if it's found out, here in King's Landing anyway." Though in the Reach and in Dorne, such things aren't frowned upon, Harold explained. Harold was proud of his blooded knuckle from tackling and punching Joffrey. Gendry was angry to see Joffrey fight Robb and Harold with a castle-forged sword. He gladly would have joined the fight and hit his wooden hammer into Joffrey's face if he had gotten close enough, but he feared angering the prince like Robb and Harold had angered him. He had heard Joffrey's threat to Robb and Harold. "How is Joffrey my brother? How do we have the same father?" Gendry found himself wondering many times. They both had gotten dressed for dining with Lord Arryn and his family. Gendry had never met Lord Arryn's family. The only member of his family he knew was Harold. Harold had told him that Lord Arryn's wife was the Lady Lysa Tully, Robb's aunt on his lady mother's side, and he told him about Lord Arryn's young son Robin and how indolent and indulged he was. Gendry also knew from Harold that Lord Arryn had been married 3 times and had lost his last 2 wives and all children he had had with them. They had gotten to the dining room of the Tower of the Hand where Gendry heard footsteps behind them. "Where were you, Robb? Did Joffrey try and shoot you with his very new crossbow?" Harold asked as he turned around. "No, but I did come across her grace, who looked at me with a deadly glare as though I tried to murder her precious and perfect Joffrey." "Not even a court fool is stupid enough for that," he replied. "Good thing that she hasn't come across me yet for improving Joffrey's little nose," said Harold. "Shame you can't do the same to his cock, milord. It's probably smaller than his nose," Gendry joked, at which the 3 boisterously laughed. Harold had just managed to stop laughing as he knocked on the door and they heard enter. It was Lord Arryn's squire, Hugh, who opened the door. He was a rough and unkempt man and was not handsome. He would look at knights with envy as though he believed that he should be a knight. Gendry often overheard him ask for Lord Arryn to have him knighted. But Hugh was of no noble house. He was the son of a nurse who cared for Robin, and upon saving his life, he promised his parents he would make him his squire. But rather than be grateful to Lord Arryn as Gendry was, he was arrogant and acted as though he was above Gendry by calling him a bastard peasant with no parents or potential. "I'm a Baratheon bastard maybe, but I'm a Baratheon nonetheless," Gendry wanted to tell him before he would him hard in the face. "Though if I punched him, I'd probably knock him out on account of his puny stature." "Ah, welcome, my friends, welcome." "Hugh, close the door," Lord Arryn said, and Harold and Robb sat down at Lord Arryn's table, with Lord Arryn at the head of the table and Lady Arryn sitting next to him and young Robin Arryn sitting in between them. There was 1 chair remaining, for Princess Arianne, Gendry quickly deduced. "Gendry, could you go downstairs and greet Princess Arianne and escort her up here, please?" asked Lord Arryn. "Of course, milord," said Gendry. He left and went downstairs and waited for the Dornish princess. Gendry had come across many beautiful women in his life, pretty women. None came as close as beautiful as Queen Cersei, but she scared him with her glares at his father and the way she would look superciliously at all around her, as though she was a mighty lion that was surrounded by sheep and that it was only by her mercy that the lion hadn't eaten the sheep. But Princess Arianne made him sweat, for as well as being very beautiful and alluring, she was seductive and looked lustfully at men and women both, but noticeably never a Lannister or a Baratheon, he thought. Gendry knew his place and knew that such a woman would never marry someone like him, and the only woman he wanted to take to bed was the one he wanted to marry. But he knew how tempting it would be if the Dornish princess did make such an offer of taking him to her bed. "Oh, are you here to escort me, squire?" he heard an exotic and ravishing voice say. He recognized the voice of the Dornish princess and saw her walking towards him. He bowed and said, "Yes, I am, princess. If you are ready." "I am," she said. He led her upstairs and she asked, "So, what is your name?" "I am Gendry Storm, princess," he replied, whilst feeling paranoid about her finding out too much. Despite how close she appeared to be to Robb, he didn't feel as though he could trust her as much as he trusted Harold and Robb. "And how did you get so big and strong, Gendry Storm?" she asked. "From being a blacksmith's apprentice for 8 years, princess." "My father was also very big and strong," he replied. "I'm sure." "Was he handsome like you are?" she asked. Gendry wiped the sweat forming on his head before he replied, "I do not know, princess, for I never knew him. I just know what my mother and his friends told me about him," he replied. "Did you know that in Dorne bastards aren't looked upon as despicable spawn? Indeed, bastards are treated as well as any other true-born children in Dorne. My uncle has 8 bastards, my cousins whom I love dearly, she said with a sympathetic tone. Gendry noticed how she said it, as though letting him know that not everyone in the world is cruel to those whom are bastards. Good for them. If all Dornish are as lustful as her, there must be surely plenty of bastards all around Dorne, Gendry thought. Using the name Storm, Gendry felt disdain from people in King's Landing when he told them his name. What have bastards done to them to treat all bastards so cruelly? Gendry wanted to ask each of them. I did not know that, Princess. Perhaps, when I no longer serve Sir Harold Hardyne, I may travel to Dorne, he replied. Do. And if I find you in Sunspear, I'm sure we could continue this conversation further, she said with an alluring grin before he knocked on Lord Arryn's door. Princess Arianne Martell, Milord, Gendry said, now understanding why Robb and Harold wanted lots of water after escorting her to the Red Keep. Gods, I need some fresh air. Arianne 3. Flirting with Gendry, Storm felt good. Now she could focus on talking with 3 of the most honorable men in King's Landing. She knew that flirting with any of them with the intention of trying to get them into her bed would be unsuccessful. And she was excited when Jon Arryn had extended an invitation to her. She was glad that Robb Stark would be there. She liked him. She liked him ever since the day of her arrival in King's Landing, and she was wandering around the Red Keep. She saw Robb Stark stand between a vicious and furious Crown Prince Joffrey and his siblings, the Princess Myrcella and the Prince Tommen. She had heard whispers of Joffrey's cruelty, but to try and harm his own siblings was beyond mere cruelty. This was pure evil. She immediately noticed how he passed an ugly dagger to his bodyguard, Sandor Clegane. Was he going to use it on either of his siblings, or his little brother's tiny kitten? And so, she feigned interest in Prince Joffrey to lure him away from them. Joffrey looked as though he had been starved of beautiful high-born ladies and princesses showing any interest in him, as though his mother stopped them from going near him, and so he was gladly eating any compliment she said, even if they were few. And she found him truly dull and boring, prideful and arrogant. Arianne noticed how he would puff out his chest and try and look bigger. Every time that he did or said something, she couldn't help but compare him to Robb, who never spoke arrogantly, puffed out his chest or looked at her as though she was a common whore. But even her flirtation with Joffrey didn't last, for Queen Cersei soon came to join them whilst Joffrey had been telling her about how skilled he was with a sword and with a crossbow, and say, Joffrey, my sweet, a new crossbow has just arrived for you. A great Mirish-made crossbow decorated with golden lions and painted red whilst darkly glaring at Arianne. She then took Joffrey by his sleeve and whispered, remember what happened to your Aunt Elia, whore, for only Arianne to hear. How fucking dare you? What did she ever do you that you should mention her in such a way, you hellcat? She thought as she walked away to find Robb. And she liked talking to Robb in the stables and in the Kingswood. Robb never tried to look bigger or stronger. He never spoke in vanity or with arrogance. He was refreshingly honest and kind. She saw that in how he treated his direwolf, Grey Wind, and introduced Grey Wind to Myrcella, Tommen and Lord Tyrion. She liked how there was no hidden motive or agenda behind his honesty, kindness, and how restrained he was in never once looking down at her body or flirting back and trying to entice her into bed. She liked how he saw her differently than many others saw her, and that he knew that she wasn't a whore as the stories would tell one in court. And she liked that he believed in justice for her Aunt Elia and her cousins Aegon and Rhaenys. Upon Gendry Storm announcing her arrival, the door was opened by a man wearing a tunic of the Arryn sigil, and he was the same height as her, not handsome at all, and looked rough and untidy. He looked at her as any commoner would look at a whore. Princess Arianne, welcome, Lord Arryn said. Hearing her name and title, the rough man suddenly remembered his position and stood aside and let her past. Perhaps sharing the fate of Lord Varys would be beneficial in reminding you of your station, and it would allow you to think with your brain and not your cock, Arianne thought. Princess Arianne said Sir Harold, who rose and bowed his head to her. Ari, said Robb with a smile. She noticed how he called her by her nickname. He remembered. She smiled at that and said, hello Robb. How is Grey Wind? He's just had his own dinner, a swim in the gardens, and is sleeping it all off, said Robb. Gendry pulled out a chair for her and she sat down. As she sat down, Arianne noticed Lady Arryn and the young Robin Arryn, a boy of 7, and yet he looked small, frail and weak, as though shouting boo at him would give him the fright of his life. Lady Arryn, a pleasure, Arianne said. Princess, she said stiffly. "Hello, Lord Robin," she said to the little son of Lord Arryn. "Hello, Princess," he said shyly. "Am I the first woman other than his mother or his maid that he's met? How is Lysa, the aunt of Rob?" she wondered. "He is so handsome and full of life. She looks devoid of it and is unattractive and wears too much makeup. If I wore as much makeup as she does, then I would be as pale as a northerner. And she looks at me as though I am a whore. This is my least revealing dress I brought with me. If I wore anything from your wardrobe, I would sweat like you would if you wore any of Queen Cersei's dresses in Dorne." "Well, Princess, you join us at some very good news for Harold," said Lord Arryn. "What news?" she asked. "Harold has been offered the hand of marriage from House Stark. Rob's younger sister Sansa shall marry Harold soon after her 6th and 10th name day next year. And when you are married, Harold, I have decided to gift you the lordship of Swordsong Castle. It is newly built and is on the coast of the Bight, directly south of the Three Sister Islands. A few villages are being built and a town surrounding the castle is being settled as we speak." Harold looked so surprised and so happy. "Congratulations, Lord Harold," Rob said with an emphasis of Lord, clapping his shoulder. "My congratulations, Lord Harold," Arianne said with an honest smile and raised a cup to his good fortune. "Well done, my lord," said Gendry to his master as he passed him a cup of wine. "Thank you so much, my Lord Arryn," Harold said, raising his cup to Lord Arryn. Arianne noticed that Lysa looked pleased, but not in a happy way, in an ambitious way. She knew that Robin and Harold were Jon Arryn's only remaining young relations. She quickly realized that in view of Robin's poor health, Harold would also be considered second in line to the Vale. She sees him as a threat to her son's right to the Vale. She is as blind to her son's problems as Queen Cersei is in regards to Joffrey's cruel and despicable behavior. Arianne knew that if she had children, then she would never overindulge them or treat them badly, she would always teach them what was right and what was wrong. "And what of you, Rob? Have your parents secured a marriage match for you?" Arianne asked, though a part of her felt a little upset at saying it, the thought of Rob marrying a southern or northern woman. "Not yet. I'm sure I'll find out when I return home to Winterfell," he replied. "There can't be that many choices of southern women whom are equal to your house. No Arryn of the Eyrie, Baratheon of Storm's End nor Lannister of Casterly Rock of note. Just Margaery Tyrell of the Reach, a few of her little cousins, Princess Myrcella here in King's Landing and me of course," said Arianne with a coy giggle, but she also felt a little ticklish and moistening heat between her legs as she said her own name and briefly imagined marrying Robb Stark. "A cold and honorable Stark of Winterfell as your husband. Where would you even live? In Sunspear or in Winterfell? It would drive you both mad," Harold pointed out with a chuckle. "Was that a blush when I mentioned Robb and I marrying? Does that appeal to the handsome young wolf? I'm glad I didn't take him to bed immediately. I might have lost interest soon after, or would I? Would he have married me as his honor would have dictated?" Arianne thought. Dinner was good, though the food was not spicy and unexciting. The wine was good Dornish wine, which reminded her of nights of promiscuity in Sunspear with Oberyn, Nymeria, Tywin and anyone they invited to their beds. Arianne was eager to be going back home to Sunspear. But she was glad to have come to King's Landing. She was glad to have met Robb Stark and Harold Hardime, but especially Robb Stark. She thought that if she did marry Robb Stark, their children would inherit both Dorne and the North, two of the most powerful and most culturally different from any other kingdoms of Westeros. Whilst the Andals were the majority culture of the rest of the kingdoms, it was the Rhoynar who ruled Dorne and the First Men who ruled the North. And if her father did give her birthright to Quentyn, then Robb and a Stark army in the thousands would take back Sunspear in her name. But would he agree to such a marriage? Would his parents? She liked being friends with him and she liked that he respected her and saw that there was more to her than just her promiscuous reputation. The more that she thought about Robb, the more she thought about marrying him. And the Seven Kingdoms cannot be truly united when Dorne still is at odds with the Iron Thrones, for obvious and justifiable reasons, true. But, in the interest of potentially saving lives in the thousands and preventing wars in the future, there must be a clear sign of peace, said Lord Arryn. Arianne stopped her daydreaming of what she and Robb could achieve together and turned to Lord Arryn. Of course, Lord Arryn, Dorne wants peace. But first, Dawn must have justice for the Martells who had been murdered, and their murderers are still alive and have never been punished for the evils they have committed, Arianne replied. Both Robb and Harold voiced their agreement to her statement, and even Gendry Storm nodded as though he agreed with her. But Lysa scoffed at her mention of justice being served for her family, at which Lord Arryn tuned to face her and whispered, "Not here, please." "Thank you, Lord Arryn. There cannot be any peace in the Seven Kingdoms whilst those who murdered Elia and her children still live in relative safety and comfort in the Westerlands, especially the one who gave the order," Arianne continued. "A grievance not forgotten across Westeros, Princess Arianne. But you must remember that House Martell was not the only great family to lose loved ones. I lost 2 of my nephews in that war. The Stark family also lost loved ones," said Jon Arryn whilst nodding to Robb. She remembered her talks with Robb in the Kingswood and how the war had started because of the selfish, stupid and unfaithful Rhaegar Targaryen turned his back on his beautiful wife and his 2 lovely little children to kidnap Lyanna Stark, Robb's aunt, and how his uncle and grandfather were murdered by the Mad King when they tried to demand justice for the kidnapping. "I apologize, Lord Hand." "I'm sorry, Robb," she said. "Thank you," Robb said with a nod, and Lord Arryn smiled politely and he reached for his cup of wine. Robin, she noticed, looked at his cup with interest and asked, "May I drink some wine, father?" "No, I'm afraid you're too young to drink wine, my dear boy," said Lord Arryn. "You mustn't drink wine, sweet Robin, my darling. It is not good for you," said Lysa Arryn as though she was talking to a newborn babe. "Does she still breastfeed him?" "I heard a rumor, but is it true?" Arianne wondered. "Sweet Robin. Darling. She treats her 8-year-old son as though he was newly born. When Quentyn and Tristan were his age, they were already squires for the houses of Euronwood and Blackmont respectively. How will he be respected by his subjects when, or if, he becomes Lord of the Eyrie and Warden of the East? No, cousin Robin, you don't want to drink wine at your age. Otherwise, you'll be like Harold and I, losing our brains to wine and making us stupid," Robb said with a friendly smile to his young cousin. "It's not just wine that will do that, Robin. Also knocks on the head from fighting," said Harold before he lightly slapped Robb on the back of the head. Robb looked around like a confused buffoon and screwed up his face in a silly way and said in a court fool's voice, "What was that?" Little Robin giggled as though it was the funniest thing he had ever seen. But Robin, Arianne could see, looked at his father's wine cup still. She could see how he looked at it. It reminded her of when her younger brothers would want to try and look and feel involved in the conversations of adults at court or at the dinner table. He feels left out and has no friends, because of Lysa Arryn's stupid mollycoddling, Arianne thought. Jon Arryn was about to drink from his wine cup when there was a knock on the door. "Hugh," said Lord Arryn, putting down his wine cup. Hugh opened the door and it was Littlefinger. Arianne had, for a night, stayed at Littlefinger's brothel and enjoyed the company of 2 women and 2 men. But that meant nothing to her. Just like when she lay with men and women to get what she wanted, they were just to pass the time. Lord Arryn, he greeted the hand of the king by bowing his head to him and then bowing his head to Harold, Robb and then Arianne. "Lord Baelish. Good evening. How may I be of service tonight?" asked Lord Arryn, standing up and walking toward him. Arianne noticed Lady Lysa beaming with happiness at seeing Littlefinger. "Why? Are they old friends?" "They can't be lovers, they are both unattractive people, her especially." Littlefinger and Lord Arryn talked at the door, and Arianne turned back to her wine when she saw Robin taking his Lord Father's cup. "Good for him, enjoy some wine and maybe you'll be brave enough to stand up to your stupid mother," Arianne thought. But as he drank a sip, Lysa Arryn saw him. Her eyes opened wide. She screamed. She screamed louder than any noise Arianne had ever made whilst having a fuck. Lord Arryn, Littlefinger, Harold, Robb, Gendry and Hugh all turned to Lysa. And Robin started coughing out his wine and then he began convulsing and vomiting. "Harold, rouse Grand Maester Pycelle. Now. Robb, take my son with you to Grand Maester Pycelle," Lord Arryn commanded. Gendry opened the door faster than Hugh could come out his shock trance as Harold ran downstairs as fast as he could and Robb picked up his little cousin with one hand effortless and ran as fast as he could, whilst gently carrying him. Arianne ran downstairs alongside Gendry, Lord Arryn, Littlefinger, Lysa and Hugh. "This and why am I being disturbed at this hour?" Grand Maester Pycelle demanded. Begging your pardon, Grand Maester, but the young Lord Arin is very seriously sick and I was to wake you as he is being brought down right now, Harold replied. And at that, Rob kicked open Pycelle's door and brought the still vomiting young Robin. Lysa Arin was frantically crying and screaming at her son's sickly state. Littlefinger and Lord Arin were holding her and trying to calm her. He's sick. He needs me. Sweet Robin needs his mother. Lysa, we must let Grand Maester Pycelle help him, right now he needs to be saved, said Littlefinger, but Ariane noticed how Littlefinger's eyes looked surprised and scared by all of this. Rob lay Robin on Pycelle's table and Pycelle asked what happened. He drank from his Lord Father's wine cup and then he started vomiting, said Ariane. How soon after did he start vomiting, Princess? He asked. Immediately after, Grand Maester, she replied. Pycelle examined his throat and inside his mouth and said, Sir Harold, bring him 2 cups of water and a bucket. Upon bringing a bucket, Pycelle ensured that he vomited into the bucket, whilst also taking a vial from a shelf full of vials and jars of liquids. He gave Robin a little vial of a dark green colored liquid and Robin drank it. He vomited out more. Lysa pushed past Littlefinger and her husband and was screaming unintelligibly at Pycelle. Ariane could understand her saying the words, don't poison my baby, and stay away from my Robin. Keep her out of here. Pycelle ordered. Gendry gently kept Lysa back and slammed the door shut. What did the vial do, Grand Maester? Rob asked. Hopefully it emptied his throat of the remainder of the poison and all remaining vomit. Now, we wait, said Pycelle. Robin stopped vomiting and started breathing heavily as though the vomit has been stopping him from breathing. He coughed a little before he said weakly, water. Pycelle took one of the cups of water that Harold had brought and he said, drink, Lord Arin. You'll feel better. He drank it, he coughed a couple of times, but then he stopped. Pycelle gave him the other cup of water and said, now, use the water to spit out the vomit from your mouth, my lord. Robin did as he was told and then lay on his back, panting. Now, take a few deep breaths, Lord Arin. It's all over now. You're safe, said the Grand Maester in a kind and gentle voice. He did as he was bid. Now, how do you feel? Tired and hungry, he replied weakly. I'm sure that you do, a brave boy like you, he said. It's over now, the Grand Maester confirmed to all in the room. Gendry opened the door and Lysa and Lord Arin rushed inside and to the side of their son. Will he be okay, Grand Maester? Lord Arin asked. I should think so, Lord Hand. The worst is over now. Ariane suddenly remembered when Lysa opened her eyes wide and how loud she had screamed the moment that she saw Robin drink from his father's cup. And then she remembered when Pycelle said poison as he was vomiting out into the bucket. She turned to Rob, whom was standing in a far corner of the room. He had looked scared earlier but now looked relieved and was taking a few deep breaths. Ariane walked to him and held his hand. She felt strangely happy as she held Rob's hand, happy in a way that she hadn't felt before. Are you okay? She gently whispered. I think I will be. By the old gods, that was scary. How could he be so sick that a small sip of wine made him vomit out his dinner and cause him to nearly choke? He whispered back. Rob, it wasn't his illness. I think he drank poison intended for Lord Arin. He turned around to her and asked, poison? What makes you so certain? Pycelle said poison when he was vomiting into the bucket. And just as Lord Arin was talking to Littlefinger, I saw Robin drink from Lord Arin's cup. And the moment that Lady Lysa saw him drink from the cup, that was when she screamed. Not when he started to vomit, but when he drank from his father's cup, Ariane said, now realizing how dangerous the consequences of what she was saying. That Lady Arin could have been trying to murder her own husband. How sure are you that that was when she was screaming? Rob asked, looking scared as if he realized what this meant. Absolutely sure, she whispered as the two turned to the table. What now, Grand Maester? Asked Lord Arin. Now, my lord, Lord Robin must drink plenty of water, eat small amounts of food for the next day or so, healthy food like fruit, vegetables, bread and small bits of meat and not exotic or sweet food, and stay far away from wine until he is the right age to drink it. Yes, I think we've all learned that lesson now, said Lord Arin, before he turned to his son. He said, now, Robin, what do you say to the man who saved you? Thank you, Grand Maester, said Robin. You're most welcome, my lord, said Pycelle, smiling kindly through his large white beard. Grand Maester, what could have caused such a sudden outburst of vomiting from just a curious little sip of wine? Harold asked. His illness, of course. I knew that he couldn't drink wine, for that would make it worse, as we've just witnessed now, said Lysa very quickly. Ariane shook her head very slightly. She knew this was a lie, for she talked too quickly to give an explanation, and her eyes darted to everyone in the room, as if hoping that they were convinced by it and hoping to be backed up by others. I can assure you, Lady Arryn, that this was in fact poison. I'm sure of it, said Pycelle. What sort of poison, Grand Maester? Robb asked. Either wolfsbane or tears of lies, Lord Stark. Of that, I'm certain. It's a very fortunate thing that you had brought him down so quickly. Had he arrived a moment later, and he might not have made it, Pycelle explained. Ariane glanced around for the reactions of room. Harold and Gendry looked shocked. Lord Arryn looked shocked and hugged his son and kissed him on the forehead. Lysa was crying hysterically whilst Littlefinger was hugging her and trying to calm her. He looks a little, too, close to Lysa Arryn, Ariane thought. From her days of seeing secret lovers meet in court in Sunspear, most often was her Uncle Oberyn and Aunt Ellaria taking married men and married women to bed. Lysa, Petter, Hugh. Can you please take Robin to bed? I think he needs plenty of rest and water, like Grand Maester Pycelle said. Lord Arryn said. Of course, Lord Hand. Come Lysa. Come, Robin, said Littlefinger, and they helped Robin from the table and he walked slowly, for he still looked weak. Hugh, prepare his bed and make sure he has plenty of water if he needs it, said Lysa. Of course, milady, said Hugh. Thank you so much, Grand Maester, said Lord Arryn as he shook his hand and gave him a small pouch of coins. Ariane saw gold dragons as Pycelle opened the pouch. It is my honor to help, Lord Hand. I will pray for his swift recovery tonight, he said. Thank you. Good night, Grand Maester, he said. Good night, Lord Hand. My lords. Princess, he said as Ariane and the others left. Robb turned to Ariane and whispered, did you see how quickly Aunt Lysa tried to claim it was his illness and how nervous she looked? Good, he believes me. I feared he wouldn't when this his aunt we accuse. Yes, I did. I still think that she did it, she said. As do I. We must tell him, Robb said. Tell him what? Harold asked, overhearing what they were saying. Robb whispered into his ear. Lysa. But why? He asked in a state of surprise. We may find out soon, if we tell him and then confront her, Ariane replied. Lord Arryn, said Harold. Yes, said Lord Arryn, looking sad and scared, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked vulnerable and weak. Ariane thinks she might know who had poisoned your wine cup, he said. Do you, Princess Ariane? He asked, looking up at her with hope. My lord, I am sorry to say this, but when Lord Baelish entered your chambers, I saw Robin drink from your cup. And so did Lady Lysa. And the moment that she saw him drink from it, her eyes opened wide and she screamed. And that was before the vomiting started. Lord Arryn looked even more distraught than before. My wife. But why would she? He asked. That's not all, Lord Arryn. When Harold had asked Pycelle how this could have happened, Aunt Lysa quickly came up with her explanation, and I saw how she was looking around at all of us in the room, as if trying to see our reactions and if we believed her. Robb added. Do you realize what you're saying, Robb? I do, my lord, said Robb. I don't want to believe this. But I must be sure. But why would she do this, even if she were responsible? Lord Arryn asked. He thinks that if Robb would say it, then it wouldn't be a lie. Robb, Harold and Gendry took their swords, that they had left at the bottom of the Tower of the Hand, and walked with Lord Arryn, and Ariane followed them as they quietly walked up the Tower of the Hand towards the dining room. Listen, Harold whispered, pointing at the door. What are they saying? Ariane murmured, for she was too far back. Harold quietly pressed his ear to the door and his eyes opened wide. Littlefinger put her up to this. They're lovers, he whispered. I thought that they looked a little too close for friends. Lord Arryn was furious. as furious as she had ever seen of the old man who had been so kind and she thought could never be so furious that he wanted to kill someone. "Open the door and arrest them," he told Harold. Harold opened the door and he, Gendry and Robb drew their swords and rushed inside, pointing their swords at Littlefinger and at Lysa, both of whom had just been kissing, only to turn to them and they looked astonished and were panicking. And still they were holding hands. For someone who is master of coin and just tried to have the hand of the king murdered, you really aren't that bright, are you? What's the meaning of this? Littlefinger demanded as Arianne stepped inside, looking at them with disdain, for trying to murder such a kind, good and honorable man and putting the life of an innocent little boy in danger. Lord Arryn closely followed behind. "Lord Petyr Baelish, you are under arrest for the attempted murder of the Hand of the King and the attempted murder of Lord Robin Arryn, said Lord Arryn angrily. Littlefinger took a step back when he saw Lord Arryn and heard his charge. He was backed into a corner and had no way of getting out. "My Lord Hand, there is obviously some misunderstanding. If you let me," Littlefinger tried to say after gulping. His face was red as wine. "Quiet. Is my son in bed?" he demanded. "He is. Hugh has put him to bed." "My love, please, this is some mistake," said Lysa. "There is no mistake. I heard for myself what you just said before we came inside here. And we all saw you locked in a lover's embrace," said Lord Arryn. He turned to Arianne and asked, "Princess, can you please get Savardis Egen and bring him up here to arrest Lord Baelish? But make no mention of Lady Lysa." "Of course, my lord," she replied. Arianne ran downstairs and outside of the Tower of the Hand. She saw the Arryn household guard barracks, which they shared with the Stark and the Martell guards. She ran to the barracks and saw a few men sitting inside at the dinner table, playing dice and having a drink. It was Savardis, captain of the Arryn household guards, Captain Jory Castle of the Stark household guards and Demon. She opened the door. The three looked at her in surprise. "Princess, is everything okay?" Demon asked. "No. Savardis, Lord Baelish just tried to murder the Hand of the King. Instead, he inadvertently poisoned Lord Robin," she replied, panting and exhausted from the running and the adrenaline. "Is Lord Robin all right, Princess?" asked Captain Castle. "He's safe and is recovering, but Lord Baelish is being held and Lord Arryn wants him arrested now," she replied. "I'll bring the guards." "Where is he?" Savardis asked dutifully as he grabbed his sword. "In the dining room of the Tower of the Hand," she explained. "I'll be there as soon as possible, Princess," he replied before he ran to the back rooms of the barracks. Arianne ran back inside the Tower of the Hand and up to the dining room. Littlefinger and Lysa were still there. "Savardis will be here soon, my lord," Arianne said. "Thank you, Princess," said Lord Arryn. "It was her. She did this. She did this to expand Martell influence in King's Landing. And her family all enjoys to use poison. Her uncle is infamous for it," screamed Lysa whilst she pointed frantically at Arianne. "Earlier you said it was me and now you accuse her. How are we supposed to believe anything that you say?" Harold asked angrily. "At first, I thought you were half mad, but now I believe that you are truly mad," Arianne thought as she sat down across from where Lysa and Littlefinger were standing. "Lysa, you will be quiet," Lord Arryn demanded. "I will not sit here and take accusations all because of what a Dornish whore lied about," she replied. "The next man who calls me a whore, I will castrate him, and the next woman who calls me a whore, I will cut her tits off," Arianne thought as she glared at the mad woman. But then Robb stood between her and his aunt. "Aunt Lysa, you will not call her that again and you will not accuse her of the crime which you were caught and nearly killed your own son," Robb said with a fury which shut his aunt up. Arianne unintentionally smiled for a moment. She smiled that Robb would defend a woman he had only known for a few days against his aunt, his mother's sister. Her heart started beating faster as she looked at Robb. And it was then that she heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. "Gendry, take Lysa to my chambers." "We'll deal with her momentarily and quietly," said Lord Arryn, upon hearing the armored footsteps. "At once, my Lord," Gendry said loyally. Gendry grabbed Lysa, she tried to claw him with her nails. But he was a very brawny and strong young man and he picked her up with one hand and covered her mouth with the other and lifted her out of the dining room as though she was a rag doll and over to Lord Arryn's bedroom. Littlefinger looked so scared. He used to look so arrogant and so powerful, but now he looked so scared and powerless. He was shivering and sweating. Chapter 9, Chapter 7. Chapter Text. Rob 4. It was then that Lord Arryn took a new parchment and a new ink jar and he began writing a letter. Whilst Arianne had gone to get help, he had already written one letter and a warrant. Harold stood aside to let Savardis inside. "My lord, Princess Arianne said that there was a murder attempt on you and your son," he said, just as Lord Arryn had finished writing the second letter. "That is true, Savardis. There sits the guilty man. Take him to a black cell. I will arrange his trial very soon. And take men to secure his quarters at once. If there is any further evidence of treason and wrongdoing, I will find it tomorrow morning," said Lord Arryn before handing him his warrant, stamped with the seal of the hand of the king. "Of course, my lord," he said as he placed the warrant in his pocket, and he told two of his men, "Willem, Bernard, take him." The two soldiers grabbed Littlefinger and took him out. Savardis and the rest of his men followed them. "Now that he is away, I would finish with Lysa," said Lord Arryn. And it was then that Hugh had come downstairs, unaware of what was going on. "Ah, Hugh, take this letter and send a raven to Riverrun," said Lord Arryn, passing one of his two letters to him. "Yes, my lord," said Hugh before he sauntered off downstairs. The three men and Arianne walked to his bedchamber. Lord Arryn knocked on the door and said, "Gendry, can you open the door, please?" "Yes, my lord," said Gendry, and he swiftly opened the door, a sword still in his hand, and Arianne saw Lysa's mouth was gagged. A sensible choice, for she would most likely have screamed until her voice was deep as a man's. "Remove her gag," said Lord Arryn. Gendry did as he was told and pulled the gag out. She panted as she caught her breath, and before she could say any insult or threat, her husband spoke. Lord Arryn ordered, "Search her pockets." Gendry put his sword aside on the bed and started searching through her dress pockets. His eyes opened wide when he said, "My lord." "What have you found?" Lord Arryn asked. Gendry pulled out a small glass vial, sealed with a wooden cork, and inside was a purple liquid. "Tears of lies," Arianne whispered quietly, which Rob could hear. She must know what it looks like from her uncle Oberyn, whom is known as the Red Viper, for his extensive use of poisons, having studied at the Citadel in Old Town, Rob thought. There was a popular rumor that Prince Oberyn Martell even kept a laboratory containing vials of deadly poisons, 2 tables for interrogation, and even a variety of dangerously poisonous plants. "Tears of lies, just as Pycelle said Lord Arryn. And at that, Lysa grabbed Gendry's sword and tried to cut at him. Gendry grabbed her wrist with one hand and squeezed it until she dropped the sword. She cried in pain. Gendry grabbed his sword again and pointed it at her. Lord Arryn turned to Harold and said, "Harold, take Gendry, and tomorrow, I want you both to take Lady Lysa to her girlhood home of Riverrun. You will say to any who ask that she wanted to go back home to relax after the near attempt on her son's life, and that it has taken a hard toll on her health. Make sure to give her plenty of essence of nightshade to make sure she isn't a bother. You will give this letter to her father, the Lord Hoster Tully," as he drew the second letter from his pocket, sealed with the seal of the hand of the king. "No. My love. You cannot do this. You can't keep me from my son. He needs his mother," she screamed hysterically, her voice growing louder with every word she said. "Gendry and I will leave in the morning soon after a quick breakfast, my lord," said Harold as he took the letter, ignoring Lysa. "Good. Now, lock this room and leave some food and water in here for her," said Lord Arryn. The four left the room and Lord Arryn gave the key to Gendry and he had locked it, whilst Lysa screamed with such fury at the door whilst banging it. "Gendry, bring some essence of nightshade from Pycelle to help her sleep," Lord Arryn said. "Right away, my lord," said Gendry before sheathing his sword. "But, before any of you leave, I want to make this clear. Littlefinger will face a trial and will be executed. But Lysa will stay in Riverrun for good, at least until I deem otherwise. Only ourselves and her Lord Father will know of what has happened here. He will keep her under close watch for the time being. I can only hope that my son will be safer and happier in the Eyrie. But I want you all to swear to keep this an absolute secret. Do you swear it?" "I swear it, my lord," said Gendry loyally and without hesitation. "As do I, uncle," said Harold. "And I, my lord," said Rob. "I swear, my lord," said Arianne. "Good, now, I wish you all a good night, he said. They all left and Rob and Ariane walked outside together. Are you okay, Rob? She asked, seeing him so tense and so anxious and so stressed as he breathed in the stench of King's Landing air. I always knew my aunt was troubled, my mother had said it plenty of times. But I didn't ever think that she would stoop to this and to conspire with someone like Littlefinger and murder her own husband. I knew that their marriage was unhappy and that he is old enough to be her grandfather, and yet he has always been a kind man and a good man, but to do this, he said, feeling as though he might cry. Ariane walked to him and gently put her arms around him and pulled him close into a hug. It's okay. It will be okay. Robin will be all right and so will Lysa. It is better if she were sent to Riverrun, it will not stain the Tully or the Arryn names if it became public knowledge, she gently whispered. There's no honor in such lies, Rob said. Rob, there is more to life than honor. There is also family. That comes first before duty and honor, in the words of your mother's House of Tully, Ariane.